Welcome to the Haunting Hour. Tonight, you'll hear a collection of true scary stories for sleep that came from people around the world that are perfect for a dark, rainy night. These stories are unsettling, mysterious, and all claim to be true. Whether you're here to sleep or stay up with the lights on, settle in, relax, and listen closely. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below. Let me know which story you enjoyed the most. I was about an hour past midnight when I found myself alone on that stretch of highway. I'd left Charleston late, and despite planning to stop in Augusta before dark, I let the miles keep slipping by. There was something comforting about driving at night. No chatter, no trucks crowding the lanes, just the steady hum of the engine and the long, empty road unraveling in front of me. I had my cruise control locked at 55, windows cracked just enough to let in the early fall air, and a thermos of black coffee wedged into the center console. I wasn't tired yet. In fact, I felt oddly alert. Maybe it was the caffeine. Maybe it was the absence of noise, the kind of quiet that only seems to exist when the rest of the world is asleep. The road I was on wasn't anything special. It cut through a series of unlit pine corridors, 2 lanes wide, no reflectors, no shoulder lights. Every so often, I'd pass a faded sign for local barbecue, or an overgrown driveway that seemed to lead nowhere. I checked my phone more than once, mostly out of habit. No signal. Around 1 o'clock, I started seeing a glow on the horizon that didn't make sense. It wasn't the high beams of another vehicle. It wasn't lightning. It looked more like a street lamp halo, something diffused and yellow-orange, hanging low above the trees. I figured I must be getting close to a town, maybe a late-night diner or a gas station. Something. The map on the dash hadn't updated in nearly 40 minutes, so I couldn't be sure. As I crested a small rise, the woods opened up to reveal something that didn't belong. It looked like a town, or part of one. A single road split off from the highway, leading toward a row of well-lit storefronts with large glass windows, neon signs glowing in dusty pinks and dull greens. One of them was a diner with chrome siding and a half-lit sign that read, "Open," in cursive. I slowed the car without thinking, foot hovering over the brake. The whole thing looked too clean, not new exactly, but preserved, like it had been frozen in time. I pulled over to the side and stared for a minute. The place had a rhythm. A guy in an apron carried a tray out to a booth near the window. A couple walked a dog along the curb. A bus, or something that looked like one, sat idle under a flickering street lamp with nobody inside. But what struck me most was how quiet it all was. No wind, no distant music, no ambient noise, just my engine ticking down and the faint rustle of leaves behind me. I killed the engine and listened harder. Still nothing. That kind of quiet doesn't exist in towns, not even small ones. There should have been insects at least, crickets, tree frogs, something. But it was like sound itself had been turned down. I remember looking at the diner again. The people inside looked normal, calm. The cook was flipping something behind the counter. A waitress leaned on her elbow, bored but present. I started to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing, or if exhaustion was catching up with me. But I wasn't tired, not in the way you get when you're pushing too far past your limit. I felt alert, unsettled, but awake. I put the car back into drive and rolled slowly past the turnoff. The entrance to the town was marked only by a small green sign I hadn't seen until I was almost past it. It didn't say a name, just Service Access Road. No town name, no population marker. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to keep driving, but curiosity pushed harder. I turned in. The road narrowed immediately, like it hadn't been driven in a while. The pavement was clean but cracked in strange patterns like dried clay. On either side, low hedges and streetlights flickered in no consistent order. I rolled forward, easing toward the row of buildings. Everything looked curated. That's the only word I've ever found for it. The newspaper stand outside the corner store had papers in it. though I couldn't read the headlines from the road. A dry cleaner's next door had rotating racks visible through the front window, looping with neatly pressed shirts. And then I noticed something that made me stop completely. The man walking the dog, the same man I'd seen 5 minutes earlier, crossed the street right in front of me. Same jacket, same gait, same slow turn of the head. He didn't look surprised to see a car. He didn't look at me at all. I stopped the car and put it in park. The man and dog disappeared behind a low hedge on the other side of the street, and I waited to see if they'd loop around again. They didn't. I got out, leaving the door cracked just in case. The air was colder than I expected. Not brisk, not biting, just colder than it should have been for September in South Carolina. It smelled faintly of something dry, not burning, not mold, just dry, like old paper. I crossed to the diner. Through the window, the waitress still leaned on her elbow. The cook moved in slow, repetitive gestures behind the grill. No one noticed me. I opened the door. The bell above it should have rung. I remember seeing it, but no sound came. The waitress looked up then, like someone had called her name from far off. She blinked once, then looked past me. I stepped inside. The air was warmer here. Not by much, but enough. I walked to the counter and stood waiting. Neither the cook nor the waitress moved to acknowledge me again. I turned to look at the patrons. There were 2 of them. An older woman stirring a cup of coffee with her left hand, staring straight ahead. A younger guy near the back flipping through a menu. Neither made a sound. I walked closer to the woman. Her spoon moved in a perfect loop. Her elbow didn't rise or fall. The liquid didn't ripple. I leaned in and finally whispered something. I don't even remember what. She blinked, and her mouth moved, just a little. No sound came out. Then the door behind me creaked. I turned and saw the man with the dog standing in the doorway. But this time, the dog was gone. He stared directly at me. Not hostile, not blank, just looking. I backed up, 1 step, then another. I didn't want to be in that building anymore. I made it to the door, eased past him, and stepped outside. Behind me, the bell rang. Once. Back in the car, I locked the doors and looked around again. The buildings were all still there. The lights hadn't changed. But the people, the ones who had been walking earlier, they were gone. The couple, the cook, the woman at the table, gone. Only the man with the dog remained. He walked past my car again, slowly without looking in, and continued down the sidewalk like nothing had changed. The diner lights shut off behind him. One by one, the others followed. Storefront after storefront dimmed, leaving only a pale glow from the street lamps, which had stopped flickering. I threw the car into reverse, backed out, and turned back toward the highway. I didn't accelerate until I had cleared the entrance. Once I reached the highway, the glow behind me vanished. I didn't stop again until I reached a rest area almost 60 miles away. The next morning, I tried to convince myself I had imagined parts of it. I'd driven too long, too late, with too much caffeine and not enough sleep. But the truth was, I remembered every detail clearly. Too clearly. The way the man stared through me, the mechanical loop of the diner's spoon, the lights going out one by one. It hadn't felt like a dream. It had felt staged. And I had been the only one not given a script. I didn't mention it to anyone when I got where I was going. I was staying with my cousin for the week, and I figured if I brought it up, he'd either laugh it off or tell me I needed rest. Maybe he would have been right. But 2 days later, on a whim, I opened my laptop and started looking for any trace of that place. I searched for businesses near the stretch of highway I'd been driving. There was nothing. No diner, no dry cleaner, not even a service road in that exact spot. The satellite view showed forest and a few drainage ditches. I zoomed in until the resolution blurred. Still nothing. That's when I stopped trying to rationalize it. I couldn't sleep well that week. I kept seeing the man in the doorway when I closed my eyes. Sometimes he had the dog again. Sometimes he didn't. In one dream, or maybe it wasn't a dream, he was standing beside my bed, just staring. Always in the same stance, always with that same quiet stillness. I drove home a few days early. The route I took wasn't the same one I'd used to get there, but it passed close enough that I found myself checking the exits anyway. I didn't expect to see the town again. I told myself I wouldn't stop, even if I did. But I never saw it. What I did see, though, 2 days after I got back, was a local news segment that made my stomach twist. A woman had gone missing near one of the smaller towns about 30 miles from where I'd had my experience. She'd been on her way back from visiting her sister in Atlanta and hadn't shown up for work that Monday. The odd thing was that her car had been found, parked neatly at the edge of a rarely used access road, with the doors locked and no sign of struggle. I knew that road. It was the one I had turned down, the one that led to the town. I watched the report again, froze the footage when they showed the road sign in the background. It wasn't identical to the one I had seen, but the placement was too familiar to ignore. I pulled up my own photos from the trip, just shots of rest stops and gas stations I had passed, and compared timestamps. My last photo before entering the town was marked at 1:38 a.m., only 5 minutes before the segment of highway where the woman's car was found. That night, I dug out an old road atlas and started marking off areas that felt familiar. I made a list of possible names, old settlements, ghost towns, things that might have been annexed or renamed over time. Nothing panned out. What I found instead were references to similar events, scattered across forums, buried in comments under stories no one seemed to read all the way through. Mentions of places that shouldn't be there, towns that blinked in and out, roads that weren't on any map. Most people dismissed them as internet fiction, but a few posts, the older ones from the early 2000s, sounded too familiar to ignore. One in particular stood out. It was written by someone calling themselves June 80, posted on an old navigation tech forum. It described a town off Route 70 in Tennessee, one with perfectly preserved buildings, neon signs, and strange people who didn't speak. The post ended abruptly after the user said they saw someone in the diner window who looked exactly like themselves, seated at a table and stirring a drink that didn't ripple. The account was deleted shortly after. I didn't know what to do with that. I couldn't explain any of it, but I also couldn't stop thinking about it. I told myself I wouldn't go back, but 2 months later, I did. I waited until just after dark. I packed an overnight bag, made sure my tank was full, and drove until I found the highway stretch I remembered. No GPS. I used memory and printed maps just in case. The forest was thinner this time of year. The branches were bare, the sky overcast. I passed the marker, the one near the curve where the access road had been. There was no road now, no entrance, just a wide patch of grass and a bend in the trees. I pulled over anyway. I stepped out and stood beside the car, looking into the woods. And then I heard it, the bell. The same diner bell, faint but unmistakable, like someone was holding the door open somewhere far off. I turned toward the sound and took a step forward, then another. But nothing changed. The trees didn't part. The ground didn't shift. There was no shimmer or light, just the dark, empty woods and that faint bell. I stayed there for nearly an hour, listening. At one point, I thought I heard the dog panting again, not barking, just the sound of it breathing close to the ground. But I didn't see anything. I returned to the car and drove back in silence. No radio, no music, no caffeine, just the steady rhythm of tires and the feeling that I had been invited once, but not again. Over the years, the memory hasn't faded. I still dream about it, and not in the normal sense. The dreams don't change. They're stuck in a loop. Just like the man walking the dog, just like the spoon in the diner. The same route, the same glow, the same entrance that disappears behind me when I pass it. Sometimes, in those dreams, I stop again. I walk into the diner. I sit at the counter, and I realize I'm the one stirring the spoon. But here's what stays with me more than anything else. I've been watching for more news. Another disappearance, another car parked on the wrong shoulder, but none have come, and that bothers me, because it makes me wonder if the town still appears at all, or if it only ever appears once, to each person, just long enough to be remembered, or worse, to be recognized later. About 3 weeks ago, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, no stamp, just a folded sheet of paper with a grainy photograph inside. It was the town, faded, washed out, but unmistakable. Same buildings, same neon glow, and in the bottom corner, almost out of frame, was the man with the dog. Only this time, he was looking directly into the camera. There was a sentence scribbled on the back in black ink. It said, "You left too soon." I keep the letter in a drawer now, haven't shown it to anyone, haven't told anyone what happened. But sometimes, late at night, I take it out and stare at it, and I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed longer, if I had walked further in, or if I had asked one of those silent people what year it was, and they had answered in my own voice, or worse, if they hadn't answered at all, and I was only waiting for myself to say it. I hadn't worked a physical job in over a decade. After getting laid off from a utilities subcontractor in western Pennsylvania, I spent the next few years scraping by on temp gigs and Social Security, always one bad week away from total collapse. When I got a call from a man named Roy Temple, offering me a night shift position at a privately owned storage and processing facility outside of Erie, I said yes before he even finished explaining the terms. He sounded stiff, practiced, almost like he was reading from a paper script. All he said was that the work was solitary, paid in cash, and required a man who didn't mind long hours and no supervision. The place was called Harlow Industrial Services. No signage on the gate. Just a rusted keypad, a chain-link fence tall enough to discourage anything short of a coordinated assault, and one flickering bulb near the top corner. The facility sat low against a stretch of flat, wooded terrain just past an old logging road. I drove out just before 7 o'clock and sat in my car for a while, watching condensation bloom along the windshield. It was one of those places you get a feeling about before stepping foot inside. Not fear exactly, but a kind of internal bracing, like your mind's trying to stiffen your spine before it has a reason. Roy met me at the service entrance wearing a long coat and leather gloves. He didn't offer his hand, just nodded once and pushed open the side door with a dull creak. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly metallic, like a combination of wet copper and scorched rubber. He didn't speak much, just showed me a time clock mounted beside a fuse box and pointed out a narrow stairwell at the far end of the hall. "Your post's upstairs. You'll take hourly readings and do one task at 1/2 every hour. Do not skip it. Keep your notes neat, dated, and legible. When the week ends, leave the folder on the desk and someone will collect it. Do not linger after your shift, that's all." I didn't ask questions, I just wanted the money. The stairwell was older than the rest of the facility. Narrow steel steps lined the wall in a loose spiral, with one lone light fixture above each landing. The bulbs buzzed with that tired flicker you get in unventilated places. By the time I reached the top, my knees were aching. The door at the top didn't match the building's style at all. The frame was thicker than it needed to be, almost like it had been reinforced from the inside. No window, just a metal plate with a punch code box and a magnetic reader that didn't appear to be connected to anything. On my first night, Roy had already unlocked it. The room beyond was small, maybe 15 by 15 feet, with a single reinforced window overlooking a thicket of trees. In the center sat a heavy metal table, and on top of it, a black binder and a sealed plastic container. The binder contained a schedule of readings and maintenance tasks, all broken down into 15-minute intervals. The instructions were simple. Sit at the table, open the container at 1/2 every hour, and complete the inspection. The rest of the time, I was to log temperature readings from a device mounted to the far wall. Nothing about the building made sense, but the instructions were clear. The container wasn't locked. It didn't need to be. The first time I opened it, I didn't really understand what I was looking at. Inside were a series of what looked like irregular metal rods, bundled and threaded together with wire. They weren't uniform in shape, and the ends had faint traces of oxidation, orange, red, and black in spots. Some pieces curved inward, others split at the ends. There was no label, no manufacturer's mark, nothing I could use to understand what they were for. I was supposed to rethread them. The binder included diagrams, rough, hand-sketched things that looked like they'd been copied dozens of times. My job was to untwist the bundle, lay out each rod in the correct order, and then weave them back together again, always returning them to the container before the next half-hour mark. That was it. That was the whole job. The first 3 nights passed without anything strange. Just silence, repetition, and an increasing sense of unease. It wasn't the task that bothered me. It was the feeling that the rods didn't want to be touched. I know how that sounds, and I probably would have laughed at myself too, but every time I separated the pieces, I got this low ringing in my ears. Not painful, but irritating. Like I was picking up feedback from a speaker that wasn't plugged in. The rods were warm. Not hot enough to burn, but definitely warmer than the air in the room. I wore gloves, but the heat came through them anyway, and sometimes when I finished, the tips of my fingers would tingle. I didn't write that down in the log. I figured it would make me sound crazy. The real change came on the 4th night. It was just after 12:30. I'd finished the unthreading process, following the diagram exactly, but when I went to put the last rod back into place, it didn't fit. The piece was wrong. Not bent, not damaged, just wrong. It was longer than it had been when I removed it. I double-checked the diagram, laid it beside the other rods, even went back and looked at the photo in the binder's front sleeve from the first night. The measurements didn't match. I thought maybe I'd made a mistake earlier, but that wasn't possible. The rods only fit together one way. I tried forcing it. Big mistake. The moment I pressed down, I heard a crack. Not metal on metal. Something else, like bone under pressure. And when I looked back at the rod, there was a hairline split down the center, with something thin and pale just barely pushing through. I dropped it and backed away. My breathing had gone shallow. I remember gripping the edge of the table and trying to convince myself it was just a defect in the metal, some internal corrosion or tension from age. But the room was colder now. The buzzing light above me had gone still, not flickering, just humming. When I finally picked up the rod again, the crack was gone. I turned it over, ran my glove along the length, and found nothing out of place. But it felt different in my hand, heavier, and that warmth I'd mentioned, it was gone. The rod was cold now, not just cool to the touch, but deadened, like something had been removed from it. I finished the rethreading and put it away without another glance. That night I wrote in the log, no anomalies, readings normal, reassembly complete. It was a lie, and I think the room knew it. The following evening I arrived early, just after 7 o'clock. The sky had gone dark early, and a thick mist hung low over the trees. As I climbed the stairs, my knees locked up twice. I had to stop midway to stretch them out. When I reached the landing, the door was already ajar. Roy hadn't met me at the gate. In fact, I hadn't seen him since night 2. Inside the room, the container was open. That had never happened before. The rods had been taken out and arranged in a pattern I didn't recognize. No diagrams matched it. The wires were still threaded, but in loops now, more decorative than functional. At the center of the arrangement, something had been placed. A small cube made of the same dark metal as the rods, with faint markings etched along one face. I didn't touch it. Instead, I sat down and opened the binder, flipping to the schedule. Everything looked the same at first. Same intervals, same format. But the times had changed. Instead of readings every 15 minutes, I was now expected to complete inspections every 5. The rest of the tasks had been crossed out in pencil and replaced with a single instruction: do not let the pattern settle. That phrase stuck with me. It sounded more like a warning than a rule. I watched the rods for nearly an hour, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. But when I stood up to stretch, I could have sworn the loops had shifted slightly. Not much, just a few degrees clockwise. I blinked, stared harder, and tried to dismiss it. At 12:15, the cube at the center clicked. It was the only way I can describe the sound. A sharp click, like a latch being opened somewhere inside. The light overhead dimmed and came back brighter. My ears popped, like during a sudden drop in elevation. And then the rods began to hum. It wasn't loud, you wouldn't have heard it from outside the room. But up close, the vibration was constant, low-pitched, and impossible to ignore. The wires between them pulled tight, like tension had been introduced. I stepped closer and saw the cube at the center rotating slowly, its etched surface spinning one face at a time, like a combination lock searching for the right sequence. I didn't touch anything. I didn't speak. I just sat there, notebook open, pen hovering over the line where I was supposed to write the next temperature reading. I never wrote it down. Instead, I reached into my coat and took out the folder where I'd been keeping the previous night's logs. I flipped through them, looking for any sign that this had happened before. Some kind of hint in Roy's notes or the past worker's observations. But the pages were blank. Not just mine, all of them. Everything I'd written, everything that came before, gone. I flipped through every page again, convinced I'd made a mistake. But the ink was gone, wiped clean like it had never existed. Even the indentations from the pen pressure had vanished. My hands began to shake. I looked over at the metal arrangement again. The cube had stopped spinning. The rods no longer hummed, but the wires remained taut, vibrating faintly as though straining against some invisible tension. I stood, circled the table, and took a closer look. The ends of the rods were fused now, melted together at contact points I hadn't created. The diagram in the binder still showed the old configuration, but what sat in front of me no longer matched it in any meaningful way. Whatever this thing was, it had changed, and it had changed on its own. I reached out slowly, intending to rethread the wires into their original positions. The moment I touched one, the cube flashed. Not with light, but with movement. One of the faces dropped open like a shutter, revealing a dark void inside. I say void because it didn't reflect anything. Not my face, not the ceiling bulb, not even the rods surrounding it. It was an absence, and from within, I heard my own voice. Please stop. The words were mine. The tone, the cadence, but I hadn't spoken. My mouth was closed. My breath caught in my throat and I stumbled backward, nearly knocking over the chair. I waited, heart pounding, half expecting the cube to speak again. But it didn't. Instead, the center of the rod formation began to glow. It wasn't dramatic, just a faint, reddish warmth that pulsed from within the gaps in the wire. The longer I watched, the more I noticed the walls of the room appearing subtly different. They didn't shift or twist, nothing overt, but the corners felt sharper, like the angles were deeper than 90 degrees. The window behind me no longer showed trees. Instead, it reflected a blank stretch of gray, like fog without depth or texture. I turned away from the arrangement and sat back down. My hands were sweating despite the cold. I picked up the binder and flipped to the final page. I hadn't seen it before. It must have been added between shifts. The paper was yellowed and creased, like it had been handled many times. At the top was a simple phrase, handwritten in black marker. Maintain the integrity of the pattern. If it completes, vacate the premises. Below that were several sketches of what appeared to be earlier versions of the rod configuration. Each more elaborate than the last, each spiraling further away from the diagram I'd been following. In the corner, a note had been circled 3 times. The cube is not a power source. It is a record. Do not acknowledge it. I felt nauseous. I stood up and opened the container again, intending to dismantle everything and return the rods to storage. But the heat had returned. This time it was stronger. I couldn't touch them without burning my gloves. The wires had gone rigid. One of them snapped when I tugged on it, curling like a broken spring and slicing into the metal tabletop. The cube opened again. Another voice, this time softer, almost like a whisper inside my ear. "I warned you." I bolted. I didn't bother collecting my notes. I didn't clock out. I pushed through the stairwell door and descended as fast as my knees would allow. My hands gripped the rail so hard I left marks in the rust. When I reached the bottom and exited into the hallway, the overhead lights flickered violently. For a moment, they all went dark. In the silence, I heard movement from above. Not footsteps, not machinery. A sound like metal folding in on itself. I reached my car and peeled out of the gravel lot, tires skidding against the loose stones. I didn't stop driving until I hit a well-lit gas station off the interstate nearly an hour later. I sat there, engine running, staring at the dark tree line behind the building. Nothing followed me. But when I looked at my rearview mirror, I saw something that hadn't been there when I left the facility. A smear. Just behind the driver's seat, near the headrest, something had marked the interior glass. It wasn't a handprint. It was a pattern. Thin, looping strokes, almost identical to the wire configuration I'd seen just before the cube opened the second time. The mark was faint, like someone had traced it with a greasy fingertip and then wiped it away. I didn't touch it. I drove home with the windows down, hoping the air would carry away whatever had attached itself to me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the message, "Do not let the pattern settle." But the pattern had settled. It had changed. It had evolved. And whatever that meant, it had happened under my watch. The next morning, I called the number Roy had given me. Disconnected. I drove back out to the site, this time in daylight. When I reached the old access road, the gate was closed and padlocked. A sign had been posted just inside the fence. Property condemned. Entry prohibited by order of county authority. The structure was still there, but something about it felt hollow, not abandoned, stripped. I walked the perimeter, found the stairwell that led to the upper level, and followed the line of windows with my eyes. The one I had sat beneath was shattered. From the outside, it looked like nothing had ever been inside. No light, no wiring, just a jagged hole where glass should have been. I never spoke to Roy again. I never got paid, but the mark in my car remained, no matter how often I cleaned it. And every now and then, always at night, I'll be driving alone, windows down, air cutting sharp across my cheeks, and I'll hear it again. Not words, just a click, like a latch being thrown open. And in the silence that follows, my own voice whispering back to me, "Please stop." I never wanted to see it. I mean that in the most literal way possible. If someone had given me the choice, handed me a clipboard and said, "Check this box if you want to witness the moment your life falls apart," I'd have let the pen slip from my fingers. But life doesn't give you clipboards. It gives you doors that open whether you're ready or not. I was 35 when I started working at the old facility on the east side of the city. It didn't have a name on the outside, just a concrete block with frosted windows and a keypad entry that looked like it hadn't worked in years. You only found it if someone told you where to go, and even then, only if they liked you enough to whisper it properly. The job listing hadn't said much. Review technician needed for closed-loop archival division. Clearance required. That was it. No company name, no benefits details. No location until after you passed the screening interview. But the money was good, the hours were quiet, and I was broke enough to ignore the red flags fluttering like signal flares. When I was brought in for onboarding, I thought I was walking into a digitization gig. Maybe converting old tapes to cloud backups or tagging metadata. That was what they said it was. Metadata alignment for legacy records. But metadata doesn't make your stomach drop. Metadata doesn't make people walk out pale and silent, like they've left something behind in a locked room. The hallway to the floor they assigned me didn't have a number, just a placard with 4 faded letters that meant nothing to me. I asked my supervisor what they stood for once. She told me to log in and stop asking questions. That was my first lesson. The room I worked in had 2 chairs, a desk, and a screen. The walls were padded, not in a way that felt soft or comforting, but in the way a coffin is padded, like insulation meant to trap something inside. Every morning, I'd power on the terminal, wait for the network to approve my ID, and then a list of names would appear. One at a time, never more than 3 per day. The person would come in, I'd sit across from them, and they'd watch a video. The first time it happened, I thought it was a mistake. The screen lit up, and there it was, a moment I wasn't supposed to see. The client in a location they hadn't yet visited, suffering an event they hadn't yet experienced. Some were subtle, a seizure at a gas station, a fall in a bathtub. Others were violent. Head-on collisions, random attacks, things no one could have prepared for. And yet, somehow, the recording always knew. The company never explained where the footage came from. They didn't have to. It wasn't in the job description, and asking earned you a pink slip, or worse. I saw what happened to the guy who trained me. Nice enough. Former EMT. Kept a flask in his desk and a photo of his daughter on the monitor stand. One day he didn't show up. The next morning his desk was gone, like it had never existed. By my 3rd week, I stopped reacting to what I saw. You had to. The people who came in already knew. That's what made it worse. They weren't surprised. They were just confirming something they'd carried around for years, like a tumor they couldn't name. I remember one woman. I'll call her Ellen, though I'm sure that wasn't it. She was in her early 40s, dressed sharp, like she had just left a client meeting and hadn't stopped moving since. She sat down, folded her hands neatly, and asked if she could pray before we began. I told her she could. When she finished, I pressed play. Her eyes didn't leave the screen once. At the end, she said thank you, stood and left. I never saw her again. There were rules. Unbreakable ones. You didn't speak during playback. You didn't ask questions afterward. You didn't document reactions. You logged completion, confirmed identity, and marked the appointment as finalized. If the client declined to view the footage, you submitted a refusal form and passed the case along, but they rarely declined. If they made it that far, it meant they needed to see it. It wasn't until year 2 that something changed. I came in early that morning. Not unusual. Sometimes I like to sit with the lights off and listen to the building creak. There's something strange about a place that's only alive during business hours. The floors don't groan, the vents don't breathe, the whole structure just waits. I was booting up the terminal when a name appeared on the screen without prompting. No login, no credentials. Just a name I hadn't seen before. Nathaniel Brower. I checked the ledger. No scheduled appointments, no pending reviews. I even called upstairs, but the line just rang and rang until I gave up. So I did what I wasn't supposed to. I ran the file. The screen flickered once, then cleared. And there I was. Not Brower. Me. Same shirt I was wearing that morning. Same mole on my jaw. Same scratch on my knuckle from the kitchen drawer I'd banged open too fast. The video showed me entering the building, walking down the hall, scanning into the room. I sat in the same chair I was in right now. The timestamp matched the present to the second. I watched, frozen, as my on-screen double leaned forward, clicked a key, and began a playback session with no one else in the room. Then, without warning, the lights in the video began to dim, slowly, step by step. And then me screamed. Not like a jump scare. Not like a sharp yelp or a startled cry. This was deep, raw. Like every nerve had been pulled to the surface and exposed. I watched myself fall backward out of the chair, clawing at my neck like something was inside it. Then the screen cut to black. I sat there, breathing hard, unsure if I was sweating or freezing. My hands were shaking. The room felt smaller. The monitor no longer glowed. It was just blank glass, reflecting my face and nothing more. I reached under the desk, yanked the power cord, and left the building without logging out. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on the floor of my apartment, listening for sounds that weren't supposed to be there. I kept my phone off, didn't tell anyone what happened, didn't go online, just stayed quiet, like maybe silence could protect me. The next day, my terminal worked as if nothing had happened. The name was gone. No log entry, no error report, just 3 normal appointments and a full shift of uneasy glances. I tried to forget it. I told myself it was a glitch, maybe a corrupted file or a prank. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I fell asleep in the chair. That was the only thing that made sense. But then it happened again, 2 weeks later. Different name this time, different timestamp. But again, me. This version of the video didn't include playback. It showed me in the break room, eating from a plastic container, sitting alone at the far table. Then I stood, walked to the exit, and disappeared. Not visibly. I mean, the moment my hand touched the door, the footage froze, then skipped, then showed the room empty, like I had never been there. I went to the archive clerk that day, told him I needed a copy of the full record. He didn't blink, just stared up at me with those filmy eyes and said, "You're not cleared for internal audits." I asked who was. He said no one. I left the room before I did something I'd regret. After that, I started noticing other things, subtle things. Appointments vanishing after they were scheduled, playback logs with no accompanying footage, clients marked as processed but never seen entering the building. I brought it up with my supervisor once. She told me it was probably just data lag. The server clocks are off, she said. But the clocks weren't off. I knew because I checked them every day. And then came the red room. It showed up on a Friday. There was no name on the appointment, just a blank space and a time, 4:15 p.m. That had never happened before. I thought it was a typo. I thought a lot of things. But when 4:15 came, the door opened, and someone walked in. She didn't look like anyone I recognized. Mid-30s maybe. Sharp features, but tired eyes. Her clothes were plain, nothing out of place, but her shoes were wet. That was the first thing I noticed. Not soaked, not muddy, just damp. Like she'd walked across dew-heavy grass before stepping inside. She sat down without being asked, didn't speak, didn't flinch when I addressed her. I ran the usual protocol, verified the terminal, checked the system time, loaded the blank slot marked for 4:15. Nothing happened at first, just a static buzz, like the monitor was waiting for input it couldn't parse. Then the screen lit up. There was no header, no metadata, just a slow, dim video of the same room we were sitting in. Same angle, same lighting, same faint hum from the ventilation duct overhead. I saw myself in the chair, facing a woman with wet shoes. Not her, someone else. Slightly different face, similar posture. In the video, I stood abruptly, knocked the chair back, and bolted from the room. The image cut out, but the audio remained. Scraping, breathing, the sound of nails dragging along something soft. Then the monitor flickered off completely. The woman across from me still hadn't spoken. "Who sent you?" I asked. She tilted her head as if confused by the question and then smiled. Just barely. "I don't think you understand," she said. Her voice wasn't threatening. It was quiet, even, kind. "Understand what?" "This isn't your station anymore," she said. I wanted to ask what that meant, but my throat felt dry. The room was cold in a way I hadn't noticed until then. Not from the air, but from something else. Like the temperature had dropped around me. Not for me. The monitor blinked back on. This time, the footage wasn't from inside the building. It was outside. Parking lot view. High angle, like a security feed mounted to the corner of the facility. I saw myself exit through the side door. I paused, holding my badge, looking up at the sky like I was waiting for something. Then I walked. Out of frame, gone. The timestamp was dated 2 days from now. I looked at the woman, but she was already standing. "Wait," I said. "What is this?" "You already saw it," she replied. "No, I need to know what happens." She paused at the door, one hand on the frame. "That's the part you don't get to watch," she said. "That's the point." She left without another word. When I checked the logs, there was no entry, no record of her arrival, no recording of the session, just a blank space in the audit trail. I tried to pull the footage manually, but the interface froze, then dumped me back to the login screen. My password no longer worked. By Monday, the monitor in my room had been replaced. New mount, new model, no ports for external access. When I asked facilities about it, they said I had filed the request myself. I hadn't. That was the last week I saw Reese. He stopped coming in, no explanation. His desk was cleared, and the archive marked his files as reassigned. When I asked where, no one answered. I tried calling. No signal. His number wasn't in the internal directory anymore. It was like he had never worked here. That's when I knew the cracks were getting bigger. People weren't just disappearing, they were being rewritten. I spent my evenings watching street cameras. Not the ones on company time, but public feeds. Pedestrian crossings, metro stations, strip mall parking lots. I was looking for overlap, for echoes. I started seeing familiar faces in unfamiliar cities. A man I'd seen in a tape 2 years ago, stabbed on a city bus, now standing on a corner in Denver, smiling, alive. I screenshotted it, logged it, tracked the location. He vanished 2 days later. Feed deleted, link broken. That's when I stopped watching. The idea had started small. Maybe the system was malfunctioning. Maybe the death predictions were just suggestions. But what if it was deeper? What if the reels didn't show fate? What if they manufactured it? I thought back to that first tape, the one I'd seen of myself, the panic, the collapse. But I was still here, still breathing. I kept working, but every day felt thinner. The clients looked at me differently, like they were seeing someone unfinished. The names on the appointment list started repeating. Not exactly, just close enough to notice. M. Browning, E. Bowers, A. Brower. All variations on the same route, all with the same quiet fear in their eyes. I requested a leave of absence. It was denied. The response email didn't have a signature, just a line of text that read, "Compliance is not optional." That night, I drove out past the perimeter zone, beyond where the GPS still tracked reliably. There was a rest stop with a broken vending machine and a bulletin board cluttered with lost pet flyers and missing persons notices. I stood there, scanning the photos. 3 of the faces were familiar, not from real life, from reels. One had drowned in a flooded basement. Another had fallen from a scaffold. The third had choked during a dental procedure. But there they were, missing, not dead. It hit me then. We weren't showing people their deaths. We were removing the people who saw the wrong deaths. The facility wasn't a window. It was a filter, a sorting mechanism, a correction tool for a reality that had started to fray. I drove home and packed a bag. I didn't have a destination, just a direction. I kept thinking about the tape, the one that showed me walking, leaving, vanishing into the tree line. I wanted that ending. I wanted any ending that wasn't picked for me. The next morning, I left my keycard in the mailbox and drove until the fuel light blinked. I abandoned the car near a hiking trail and kept walking. No phone, no ID, just distance. I'm not writing this to explain. I'm writing it so there's a record. If you're reading this and someone ever offers to show you your final moment, don't watch, don't listen, don't ask. Just leave. Because once you see it, it starts changing you. And if you see the wrong one, you don't disappear. You become something the system can't categorize, something that doesn't belong anymore. The reels don't always show death. Sometimes they show deletion. And if you're lucky, they forget to finish yours. I didn't grow up afraid of the cold. Winters in the north were always brutal, but we learned to live around them. We learned which walls to seal with plastic wrap, how to dry our boots over the stove, how to let our taps drip just enough to keep the pipes from bursting. But nothing from those early years prepared me for what I felt during that winter assignment. I had been reassigned to the northern checkpoint between the border towns. Not a combat post, not technically. Just an outpost used to inspect shipments crossing the old rail system. Mostly coal, sometimes livestock. Nothing urgent, nothing worth dying over. The outpost was located at the base of a steep hill that cut into the forest. No paved road reached it anymore. The rail line was still active, but only in theory. A train might come twice a week, and even then it would slow down just enough for the engineer to toss a clipboard out the window. Most days, there was no traffic at all, just the wind and the sound of the trees shifting under the snow. I arrived just after 5 o'clock in the evening. The sky was that dull gray color that made everything feel like it was underwater. The jeep dropped me at the edge of the clearing, handed me a week's worth of rations and a fuel key, then turned around without even waiting for a signature. I remember watching the tire tracks disappear behind it as the snow filled them in. It felt like I had been buried before I even stepped inside. The outpost itself was little more than a 2-room structure built into the slope. One office in the front with a metal desk and cracked window. A small bunk room in the back with 2 iron-frame beds and a rusted wall heater. The whole place reeked of burnt oil and mice. I didn't see my partner until after I unpacked. His name was Kellen, mid-40s, buzzed hair and a limp that made every footstep sound uneven. He didn't say much beyond the basic protocol. Sign in, fuel logs, do your shift, stay warm. That first night I stayed up too long reading the logs from the past year. Most entries were blank. A few noted train crossings. 1 or 2 included small repairs to the track or the switch house. But what struck me was how inconsistent the dates were. Weeks would go by without a single note, then several pages would be filled in over the course of 2 or 3 days, all in different handwriting. Some of them just said things like noise near tree line or don't follow lights. That part stuck with me. By the second night, the cold had gotten worse. Not just outside, inside too. The heater in our bunk room wheezed out this thin, sour-smelling warmth that never seemed to reach my feet. I kept waking up with numb toes and stiff fingers. I noticed Kellen slept in full uniform, boots and all, facing the wall like he was bracing himself for something. He never spoke while lying down, never even turned his head. Around 4 o'clock in the morning, I heard the door to the main room creak open. I sat up, listened. The wind had picked up, rattling the window frame like it was being pulled from outside. I slipped on my coat and stepped into the front room. The door was shut, the lock still engaged, but a thin line of snow had crept in along the floorboards, like it had found a way through anyway. I checked the rail switch. It was still set to neutral. No sign of movement on the track. Just snow and trees, bowing under the weight of it all. That's when I noticed the light. Off past the tree line, beyond where the forest met the ridge, a faint blue shimmer pulsed. It wasn't bright, not like a lantern or a fire, more like the glow from a phone screen under a blanket. I leaned closer to the window, squinted. It flickered, then vanished. I didn't say anything to Kellen the next day. I wanted to, but something about the way he moved that morning told me he already knew. He refilled the generator, stacked another bundle of wood near the stove, and didn't meet my eye once. I ended up spending most of the day inside, sorting inspection forms we'd never use. Around 6 o'clock, the wind stopped. Just silence. Not a peaceful kind. A thick, suffocating kind. Like even the air outside was waiting. That night, the heater shut off completely. I woke up shaking, my breath visible in the dark. Kellen wasn't in bed. His boots were gone, coat missing from the hook. I called out his name. No response. I moved into the front room, but he wasn't there either. The door was unlocked. The snow outside had been disturbed. Tracks led toward the woods, not boot prints. Something longer. Dragging. I waited nearly 10 minutes before stepping out. My radio wouldn't pick up anything beyond static. I had no signal, no backup, and no way of knowing how long he'd been gone. I followed the marks into the tree line, stopping every few steps to listen. The snow was soft, almost weightless. No crunch, no crack beneath my boots. Just a kind of pressure like walking through packed ash. I lost the tracks near a downed tree. The bark had been torn open, not chewed, peeled, like fingernails under wallpaper. A soft click echoed behind me. Then another. Not fast, just steady, as if something was testing the ice with each step. I turned around, scanning the woods. Nothing, but my skin prickled like I'd brushed against static. By the time I made it back to the outpost, the sun had started to rise. I locked the door, pushed the desk in front of it, sat there with the rifle across my knees. Kellen didn't come back that day, or the next. On the third morning, a train rolled through. First one I'd seen. It didn't slow down, just thundered past, cars clanking, engine groaning under the weight. I stepped outside to watch it vanish around the bend. No engineer waved, no clipboard tossed. Just one long, wailing horn that seemed to echo far longer than it should have. When I turned around, there were footprints behind me. Mine were the only ones leading to the door. But now, there were others. Small. Bare. Each one sunken deep into the snow, as if the person had stood there, unmoving, while I'd watched the train go by. I ran inside. Locked the door again. Pushed both beds against it this time. That night, I heard scratching on the roof. Not an animal, not branches, something deliberate, steady, back and forth, like it was tracing the edges of the structure. Feeling for weakness, I didn't sleep, just sat by the window with the rifle, eyes locked on the tree line. Around 4 o'clock, the scratching stopped. Then a knock. One, then two. Sharp. Knuckle on metal, I didn't move, didn't breathe. Another knock. This time from the side of the building, then the back, then silence. I stayed awake until daylight. When I finally opened the door, the snow was undisturbed, no tracks, no markings, just white, flat, and endless. Kellen never returned. I never found a body, no blood, no clothing, nothing. By the time my relief team arrived the following week, the heater had started working again. The generator was full, and a stack of wood, freshly chopped, had been left neatly by the door. The logs were still warm. When I asked the driver if he saw anyone on the road up, he shook his head. There's no road. We fly in now. I didn't argue. I didn't sleep well after that. Even now, years later, I still wake up at 4 o'clock. Every time. No alarm, no reason. Just open my eyes and stare at the ceiling, waiting for the knock. The investigation that followed was shallow, if you could even call it that. A clipboard and a camera showed up with 2 men from the central office. One asked if I'd seen Kellen leave. I told him I saw tracks going into the woods, but no sign of where they led. He nodded like that was normal. The other man barely looked up from his paperwork. They didn't step inside the outpost, didn't ask to see the logs. They just scribbled a few things, handed me a temporary reassignment, and told me a new crew would be stationed at the checkpoint in the spring. I asked what I should do about the supplies, about the extra fuel, about the second set of keys that were still hanging by the door. The first man just smiled. Leave it how you found it. I didn't argue. I packed what I had, checked the heater one last time, then locked the door behind me. As I reached the edge of the clearing, I looked back. The outpost sat half buried in the snow, silent, still. The trees beyond it looked taller than I remembered. I didn't return to the northern posts after that. I requested relocation to a civilian depot in the Midlands and spent the next 2 years logging freight manifests and tracking delivery errors. I told myself I'd imagined it all, that the cold had gotten to me, that Kellen had slipped, wandered too far, maybe fallen through the ice. But even then, it didn't explain the chopped wood, or the prints, or the scratches on the roof. Then, last winter, something strange happened. I had moved into a small rental cabin on the outskirts of a town near the valley border. I wanted distance, silence, time to clear my head. The cabin was plain. 1 room, small stove, propane heater. No neighbors for miles, just pine trees and a narrow service road that cut between 2 steep ridges. Around 5 o'clock one morning, I woke up gasping. Not because of a nightmare, just something had shifted. The cabin felt colder than it should have. I sat up and saw my breath in the air. The propane heater had shut off. No blinking light, no sound, just dead. I climbed out of bed, still bundled in the old army coat I'd never quite gotten rid of, and stepped to the door. The snow had built up higher than usual, maybe 6 inches above the threshold. I cracked the door open and felt a rush of air against my face. But it wasn't just cold, it was thick, dense, like I'd stepped into something that didn't want to be disturbed. I looked down. There were prints again. Not boots, not paws, bare feet. Dozens of them, each one small, narrow, pressed deep into the snow. They circled the cabin, wrapped around the side, paused beneath the window. One set stood right in front of the door, toes pointed inward as if someone had stood there and waited. I didn't move for nearly a minute, just stared at the shapes in the snow, trying to make sense of them. Then behind me, a soft tapping. I turned around slowly. The back window. 3 taps. Then silence. I walked toward it, feet numb inside my socks, and raised the corner of the curtain. There was nothing, just trees. But the tapping came again, this time on the wall to my right, then the other side, then the roof. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't even loud, just methodical, measured, like someone was walking around the outside of the cabin, testing the walls, tapping once every few feet. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped back to the door, unlocked it, and yanked it open. Snow scattered around my feet. The wind had died. The prints were still there, but nothing moved. The tapping had stopped. I stood there for what felt like hours. Eventually, the propane heater blinked back to life. A soft hum filled the cabin again. I shut the door and didn't open it for the rest of the day. I didn't call anyone. I didn't report it. What would I even say? When I finally fell asleep that night, I left every light on. 2 days later, I drove into town for groceries. The clerk behind the counter asked where I was staying. I told him the ridge cabin near the tree line. His smile faded a little. He asked if I'd seen the posts. I said I hadn't. He came around the counter and pulled out a folded bulletin from the corkboard near the entrance. It was a printed alert from the regional service department. They were advising all seasonal renters to report any incidents of theft, vandalism, or animal activity around unmarked cabins. The note included a list of locations. Mine was first. I asked what had been reported. He said a couple had gone missing a few years back, never found. Another renter swore someone had followed her car on foot all the way back to the cabin. She'd seen prints in the snow behind her, but nothing when she looked out the window. He laughed when he told the story, but not in a friendly way. More like he was forcing it. Before I left, he said one last thing. Keep your lights on at night. It doesn't like the light. I didn't ask what he meant. I returned to the cabin and packed that evening. I left most of my supplies, drove straight through the night. Didn't stop until I reached a friend's apartment 4 towns south. Even now, I don't like to talk about it out loud. I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times. I've tried to explain the prints, the sound, the heater. Maybe there's a logical reason. Maybe it's just a combination of stress and sleep deprivation and the way snow plays tricks on the eyes. But there's one thing I can't explain. One thing that still wakes me up at 4 o'clock sharp, no matter where I am. It's the knock. 3 short taps, no more, no less. Always at 4 o'clock. Always from a different wall. And once, 2 weeks ago, it came from the closet. I opened the door. There was nothing. But when I turned back to the bed, I saw them. Prints. Not outside, inside. Pressed into the wood grain of the floor. Bare, small, standing just feet from where I'd been sleeping. I keep moving. I change apartments. I sleep with the lights on. I double-check every lock and latch and seal. I don't tell people because it sounds like madness. It sounds like the kind of thing someone says right before they disappear into the woods. But I know what I saw, and I know what I still hear. I don't think it followed me. I think it was always here. I think the posts and outposts and towns just carved into its home, piece by piece, until it learned how to watch us from the corners we forgot to seal. Now it watches from closets, from attics, from inside. I haven't slept in 2 nights. I sit with the lights on. I keep the heater high. I don't leave footprints anywhere anymore, not even in snow, because if I did, I wouldn't be able to tell which ones were mine. And if I can't tell that, then I won't see it coming next time. I'll just wake up cold and hear the knock. It was the fall before I turned 15 when I first heard about Cutter's Bend. I just started high school, still short for my age, still quiet enough that even my teachers had trouble remembering my name. The upperclassmen rode the buses like kings and queens, owning every seat they sat in, and I sat near the front, hoping not to be noticed. That changed the day my sister's boyfriend offered me a ride home. He drove an old silver sedan with mismatched panels and rattling shocks, the kind of car that felt like it could fall apart if you blinked too hard at a stoplight. I didn't know him well, but he seemed cool, in a bored, detached kind of way. He smoked menthols and worked part-time at a garage, always smelled like rust and engine grease. I only said yes because my sister gave me the look. The one that said, "Don't screw this up." We didn't go straight home. He picked up 2 of his friends from a gas station on the edge of town, both seniors I'd seen in the halls but never spoken to. They nodded at me like I was invisible and climbed in, one of them with a bag of chips and a bottle of soda, already half finished. The air inside the car turned heavy with salt and exhaust. We headed west, away from town, past the edge of the suburbs, where the roads grew narrow and the shoulder turned to gravel. I didn't ask where we were going. I didn't want to sound like a child. I just looked out the window and watched the houses disappear. The sun had dipped behind the trees by the time we hit the county line. The roads were barely lit, just the occasional flicker of a failing porch light or the orange buzz of an old street lamp. The pavement turned patchy, then cracked, then almost non-existent. We drove past sagging farmhouses, collapsed barns, and thick woods that looked untouched in decades. Somewhere around the 6th turn, one of the older guys in the back said, "You ever hear of Cutter's Bend?" I didn't answer. I thought the question wasn't meant for me. But he turned and looked straight at me through the rearview mirror. You know, the curve where the road falls out from under you, where the school bus went down in the 60s. 12 kids. They say you can still hear the wheels screaming if you go fast enough through the turn. He smiled like it was a joke, but nobody laughed. The driver didn't say anything either. He just kept his foot on the gas. The story shifted after that. One of them started talking about an abandoned trailer they'd found a few months back, hidden just off the bend. Said it had no power lines, no mailbox, no driveway, just a metal shell sunk into the trees, like someone had dragged it there and left it to rot. Inside there were moldy curtains and a broken chair with scratch marks along the floor beneath it. The kind of scratch marks you'd make if you were trying to push yourself backward, fast, away from something. They all said it differently, but they agreed on one thing: it didn't feel empty. I didn't say a word for the next 10 minutes. The roads grew darker, more twisted. I stopped seeing road signs. My ears popped slightly from the change in elevation, and the air smelled damp, like earth and decayed leaves. Somewhere along a narrow stretch lined with dead pines, the driver slowed the car. We weren't at a stop sign or a light. There was no reason to stop. I glanced up and saw the bend ahead. It wasn't steep, but the slope was strange, too sharp for how flat the land had been. The trees on the left leaned toward the road, gnarled and heavy like they'd been pulled there by something underground. On the right, the shoulder dropped into what looked like an empty gully. No railings, no barriers, just a smear of gravel and tire marks that vanished over the edge. We slowed to a crawl. "You feel that?" the driver asked. His voice was quiet. At first, I thought he meant the road. The car was shaking more than usual, the tires humming as if something was dragging beneath them. But then I felt it too, a pressure in my chest, not sharp but dense, like the air had turned into wet cotton, just heavy enough to make breathing feel unnatural. He didn't finish the sentence. The car jolted hard to the left, not a full swerve, but enough to make me lurch sideways in my seat. One of the guys in the back cursed under his breath, and we all looked out the right side of the car. There was something in the gully. I didn't see a person or an animal, just the reflection of something pale against the ditch wall. It vanished before I could focus on it, like a trick of the headlights. Nobody said anything, but nobody told him to turn around either. We just kept driving. The trailer showed up about 2 minutes later, tucked into a thin clearing between the trees. I wouldn't have noticed it if the car hadn't stopped. It was low to the ground, half covered in leaves and moss, with one corner buckled inward. The windows were blacked out, either with paint or some kind of heavy fabric from the inside. There was no driveway, no mailbox, just a rusted chain hanging from the front door handle, looped but not locked. The driver killed the engine. Everyone got out. I hesitated, but I didn't want to be the only one left in the car. So I stepped into the cold, uneven grass, the smell of wet wood and rust hitting my nose immediately. It was quiet, too quiet. No wind, no birds, no bugs, just the occasional creak of the metal siding settling. Someone nudged the door with their foot. It didn't budge. Another guy walked around back, then called out that the back door was already open. He sounded less confident than before. I remember every second of what happened next, even though it all felt too fast. The driver led the way in, holding up his phone for light. The inside looked worse than I expected. Not dangerous, just wrong. The air smelled old, like fabric soaked in pond water. The walls were stained with handprints, real ones. Greasy, gray-brown smears like someone had been crawling along the walls. The floor dipped in the middle, and near the far wall, there was a chair. Just one. No table, no other furniture. Just that chair facing the window, with scratch marks worn into the wood beneath it. None of us sat down. One guy whispered something about getting a picture. He pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of the chair, then another, then turned the flash on and took one more. That's when we heard the knock. It wasn't loud, just a single, dull thud. It came from under the floor. I felt my stomach drop. Every hair on my arm stood up. We stood frozen for what felt like a full minute. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then another knock, this one louder. Closer to the door, we left. Nobody said it, nobody shouted. We just moved, fast and silent. I slipped once in the grass and hit my elbow on the gravel, but I didn't stop. We got back into the car and slammed the doors. The driver didn't start the engine at first. He was staring out the windshield at the trailer. Just staring. I don't know if he saw something. I didn't ask. I looked out my own window, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shape inside the trailer window, a head, tilted, watching, but when I blinked, it was gone. The drive back was dead silent. No music, no jokes, not even the casual slaps of half-finished bags or soda bottles being passed around. The road out of Cutter's Bend felt longer than it had going in. None of the guys in the back said a word, and even the driver had his shoulders hunched higher than before, like something in him had changed. He kept glancing at the rearview mirror every few minutes. I didn't ask what he was looking for. I didn't want to know if it was still behind us. By the time we reached town, it was nearly 10 o'clock. The streetlights looked too bright after so much darkness. We dropped the other two guys off without a word, and then the driver turned down my street. I thanked him before stepping out. He didn't respond, just waited until I shut the door and drove off without even a wave. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept the curtains slightly open and stared out into the yard. I knew it was irrational, but I kept expecting to see that trailer somehow rolled up under the trees. Or worse, someone standing by my window. I didn't even undress. I laid on top of the covers in jeans and socks, phone in hand, lights on, just waiting for the sun to rise. By morning, everything felt unreal. Like a bad dream you almost convince yourself didn't happen. I tried to go about my day like normal. Ate cereal, watched part of a show I didn't care about. But sometime around noon, I remembered the photos. The guy in the back had taken a few inside the trailer, and I knew one of them had been with the flash on. I texted my sister's boyfriend and asked if he could send them to me. No reply. I waited a few hours and texted again. Nothing. That evening, I asked my sister if she'd talked to him. She shrugged and said he was probably just busy. But something about the way she avoided looking at me made me feel off. I dropped it, but the unease settled into my chest and stayed there. 2 days passed, then 3. Still no message. Then late that third night, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. No text, just a photo. Blurry, too dark to make out clearly, but I recognized the chair, the window behind it, that same broken leg and the gouges in the wood floor. It was from the trailer. I stared at it for a while before noticing something that made my throat close. There was something behind the chair, not a reflection, not a shadow. Something. A person, maybe, or what looked like one, crouched. The shape of a head tilted to the side, just barely peeking into the corner of the frame, as if it had moved into view during the flash. I enlarged the photo and squinted, trying to make out any facial features, but the detail was too poor. I thought maybe it was one of the guys, maybe a prank. Then I looked at the timestamp. It had been taken 20 minutes earlier. I didn't sleep that night either. The next day at school, my sister wasn't in class. I asked around and found out her boyfriend hadn't shown up either. Someone said his car had been found near the quarry, but the police weren't saying much. That afternoon, I went to the convenience store near the gas station where we'd first picked up the other 2 guys. One of them worked part-time there. I waited around awkwardly until I saw him stocking drinks near the back coolers. He looked different, pale, tired. He flinched when I tapped his arm and said my name like it hurt to remember. I asked if he still had the photos. He didn't answer at first. Then he said something that stuck with me in a way I can't explain. I didn't send that picture. I asked what he meant, and he just shook his head. I pressed him, but his hands were shaking now, and he dropped the box of drinks. Cans rolled across the tile and he told me to leave, said he didn't want to talk about it. Not here, not anywhere. The store manager came out a few seconds later and gave me a look that said very clearly to get out. So I did. That night I got another message. No text, just another photo. This time the camera angle was different, lowered to the ground, like someone had placed the phone near the floor. The photo was darker, grainier, but I could still make out the chair, the wall, and something else now, a series of deep scratches in the wood, moving away from the chair toward the door. Drag marks, maybe. Uneven, as if someone had been pulled across the room. The window behind the chair was cracked open. I didn't recognize the number that sent it. When I tried to reply, it bounced back. For the rest of the week, I kept waiting for another message. Every time my phone buzzed, my chest tightened, but nothing else came. Just silence. Then, 2 nights later, I woke up to the sound of metal clinking. At first, I thought it was wind against the screen, or maybe the gutter shifting, but it repeated. Steady, rhythmic, metal on metal. I got out of bed and moved to the window. The yard looked empty. I couldn't see anyone. No cars, no movement. Just the faint glow from the neighbor's floodlight across the fence. I opened my window slightly. The sound was clearer now. It wasn't wind, it was a chain, dragging. I pulled back, heart pounding so hard I thought I might throw up. I crouched low, out of sight, and waited. The sound kept going for another minute or 2, then stopped. I didn't sleep after that. Just sat on the floor with my back to the wall and my eyes fixed on the door. By morning, nothing seemed out of place. But when I stepped outside, I saw something that made me freeze. There was a faint line of disturbed dirt along the edge of the yard. like something had been dragged. From the street to the side of the house, I followed it slowly, my legs trembling with each step. The line stopped right beneath my bedroom window. I never saw my sister's boyfriend again. The police said his car had been found abandoned with the keys still in the ignition. The doors locked from the inside. There was no sign of a struggle, no footprints, no blood, just a note, written in pencil on the back of a fast food receipt, sitting on the passenger seat. It said, "Don't look in the window." Nothing else. That winter, I heard the other guy from the store moved out of state. No forwarding address. Nobody knew where he'd gone. I never got another message. The photos stopped. The knocks never came again. But sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I take a different route. Not because I think I'll end up near Cutter's Bend by accident. That place isn't on GPS. You can't search it, you can't plan a trip there. But if you've been there once, you always remember the way. And every so often, I get the feeling I'm close, like the air goes still, like the lights on the dash flicker, like the trees on the left start to lean just a little too far, and then I turn the car around. Every time, because I know what happens when you go back. I used to think dreams were just a reflection of the day, some scrambled mess your brain dumped while you slept. That changed the winter I moved into that studio apartment downtown. It wasn't anything special, just a second-floor walk-up over a flower shop, with one window that looked out onto the alley. I liked it at first. It was quiet, and for a while, I slept better than I had in years. But that didn't last long. The first time it happened, I had just gotten home from a closing shift at the bookstore. I was exhausted, had a late dinner, and was out by 11 o'clock. At some point during the night, I became aware that I was dreaming. It was the first lucid dream I'd had in years. I remember standing at the edge of a wide parking lot that sloped down toward a shuttered department store. Everything was coated in a heavy amber haze, like sunset trapped in fog. No cars, no people, just silence and heat. I told myself it was just a dream, but the atmosphere felt thick, like the air was loaded with static. I could feel it in my ears and behind my eyes. There was a distant humming, almost mechanical, coming from somewhere beneath the asphalt. I started walking toward the store. I didn't know why. I just felt drawn to it. The automatic doors didn't open when I got close. I had to push them open myself. The inside was gutted, stripped shelves, busted tile, trash piled in corners. But right in the middle of the store, lit by a hanging bulb that swung without any breeze, there was a door I had never seen in waking life. It looked like an old elevator door, half rusted and dented like it had been pried open once before and forced shut again. I didn't try to open it. I remember backing away slowly, feeling that hum get louder, then a sound, sharp and deliberate, a knock. 3 slow taps from behind the metal. I jolted awake, sitting up in bed, heart racing. My apartment was freezing, even though the heat was set to 70. I got up, walked to the thermostat, and saw it had dropped to 55 somehow. The knob was turned all the way down. I live alone. That shouldn't have been possible. I told myself it was just a weird coincidence. Maybe I bumped it in my sleep. But deep down, I didn't believe that. The dreams didn't come every night, but when they did, I always ended up back in that same decaying store, walking the same path to that rusted elevator door. Each time I returned, the door looked slightly different, more damaged, more tampered with, and each time, the knocking got louder. On the 5th visit, I noticed something new. There were marks along the floor in front of the door, as if someone had been dragged, heels scraping, fingernails clawing. That time, when I heard the knocking, it wasn't just 3 taps. It was 2 sharp bangs, followed by a long, scraping noise that vibrated through my legs. When I woke up, the power in my apartment had gone out. My phone was dead. My alarm clock was blinking 12 o'clock, even though I knew the outage had only lasted minutes. I sat on the edge of my bed, not sure what to think. Then I saw it. A fine line of black dust trailing from my front door to the middle of my living room where it just stopped. I followed it, knees shaking. The door was locked. No signs of a break-in. That was the first time I felt real fear. Not confusion, not unease, but the kind of fear that grips you by the spine and tells you something is wrong in a way that logic can't explain. I started sleeping at my sister's place twice a week. She thought I was just lonely, said I could crash on her couch anytime. I didn't tell her what was really going on. I didn't want to sound insane, but no matter where I slept, the dreams followed. One night, maybe a week after I started crashing at her place, I dozed off in the living room watching TV. I felt myself fall into that familiar dream space again. Same ruined department store, same humming. But this time, the elevator door was open just a crack. I could see a sliver of darkness inside, blacker than anything I had ever seen. And something was breathing in there. It was slow, heavy, rhythmic, like a sleeping animal, but massive. I stood frozen for what felt like hours, just listening to it inhale and exhale. Then it stopped, and the door started opening wider. I woke up gasping, my shirt drenched in sweat. My sister found me an hour later in the kitchen, clutching a steak knife with both hands, staring at the microwave like it might come alive. I told her I must have been sleepwalking. She made me tea and we didn't talk about it again. After that, I stopped sleeping in her apartment. I started sleeping during the day when I could. Nap shifts, coffee-fueled insomnia at night. But even in 20-minute naps, I was back there. Back in that store. Back at that door. The next time I dreamt, the door was wide open. I didn't look inside. I couldn't. The moment I saw the pitch-black opening, I turned and ran. But the layout of the store had changed. Every exit was bricked off. The shelves twisted into dead ends. The hum had turned into a low, grinding roar. I heard it behind me. Not footsteps, not voices. The breathing had started again, but now it was accompanied by something else. A clicking, like bones tapping against tile, sharp and constant, always in rhythm with my own heartbeat. When I woke up that time, I had a nosebleed. I'd never had one before in my life. There was blood on my pillow and on the collar of my shirt. I went to urgent care that morning, and the nurse asked if I had suffered head trauma. I said no. She asked if I had experienced any stress or anxiety. I didn't know how to explain it to her. Back at home, I opened my closet to find my jacket, and the smell hit me. It was sour, metallic, like old blood mixed with burnt plastic. At first, I thought it was a dead mouse or something, but the closet was empty. No sign of anything. The smell vanished after I closed the door again. But I kept thinking about that darkness behind the elevator door. That impossible blackness that seemed to move on its own. I started researching sleep disorders, night terrors, sleep paralysis, lucid dream studies. I even signed up for a sleep clinic at the university nearby. But the earliest available session wasn't until March, and this was early January. I didn't think I could last that long. Then, something happened that changed everything. I woke up in the dream, same as always, but this time I wasn't alone. There was a woman standing in the aisle across from the elevator. She looked disoriented, like she had just arrived there by accident. She was wearing a gray sweatshirt and had her arms crossed, like she was cold. I called out to her, but she didn't answer. She just kept staring at the elevator door, even though it wasn't open this time. Then, she turned and looked right at me. Her eyes were glassy, and her mouth opened slowly, like she was about to scream. Instead, she whispered, "You've been here longer." I didn't know what she meant. I tried to ask who she was, but she turned and walked straight toward the door. It opened for her like it had been waiting. I begged her not to go in, but she didn't even hesitate. She stepped into the darkness, and it swallowed her. I waited. I listened. But the breathing never started. The hum was silent, and the elevator stayed open. When I woke up, I found a voicemail on my phone. It was garbled and distorted, just wind and static, with a faint clicking underneath. I played it back 5 times, and on the 6th, I heard it. The same whisper, "You've been here longer." I deleted the voicemail without thinking. Then, I emptied the trash folder and shut my phone off entirely. But the sound kept playing in my head, like it had embedded itself somewhere deeper. That clicking rhythm, the one that mirrored my pulse, was there every time I closed my eyes, even for a second. I stopped dreaming after that, at least as far as I could tell. I wouldn't black out or enter a dreamscape. I would just blink and then the sun would be up. My body felt rested, but my mind was drained. The silence from the dreams wasn't comforting. It felt like a warning, like whatever had been behind that elevator door was waiting for something or someone. About 2 weeks after that voicemail, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was a text this time, no words, just a photo. The image showed the entrance of a large, empty department store at night, the same kind from the dreams. I stared at it for almost 10 minutes before I realized that in the reflection of the glass doors, something was visible. A figure. Small, indistinct, but watching. I blocked the number immediately and tossed the phone in a drawer. But that night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps in my apartment. Slow, deliberate steps across linoleum. I couldn't move. I was lying on my back, eyes open, completely alert but frozen. The steps stopped at my bedroom door. There was no knock, just breathing. A long, deep exhale that dragged through the crack under the door. Then nothing. When I finally could move again, the apartment was silent. I checked every door and window, all locked. The front door still chained. I told myself it was sleep paralysis, that the dreams had just infected my brain to the point that I was manifesting them during light sleep. But that didn't explain the muddy footprint just inside the threshold. It didn't match any of my shoes. I cleaned it up and never told anyone. 3 days later, I ran into a woman in the stairwell of my building. She was carrying a grocery bag and struggling with her keys. I offered to help and held the door open while she sorted through them. She looked at me, paused, then asked if we had met before. I said I didn't think so. She squinted. "You ever work at North Shore Plaza? Long time ago?" I shook my head. Never been there. Her face changed slightly, like something dawned on her. She smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "You've got that same look. Like you've seen the black door." Before I could ask what she meant, she walked inside and let the door close behind her. I didn't sleep that night. Eventually, I began avoiding my apartment completely. I stayed late at work, slept in my car, crashed at all-night diners until I got kicked out. But exhaustion always won, and the dreams always returned. The final time I saw the elevator, it was no longer in the department store. The layout had changed again. Now it was buried deep within some kind of underground structure. The walls were made of wet, yellow concrete. The floor sloped downward as I walked, and each step echoed like I was inside a massive tunnel. The humming was gone. No breathing, no clicks. When I turned the corner, the elevator was waiting, door wide open. This time, I could see the inside clearly. The space was cramped, metal-lined, with only one button panel that had no numbers. Just one single button, return. Something in me screamed not to get closer, but my body moved on its own. I stepped in, hand shaking as I reached for the button. When I pressed it, the doors closed instantly. The moment they shut, I felt weightless, like gravity had been peeled away. Then an unbearable pressure filled my head. My ears popped, my eyes throbbed. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. All I could do was brace myself as the elevator began to descend, or maybe it was ascending. I honestly couldn't tell. It moved for what felt like hours, then came to a dead stop. The doors didn't open. Nothing happened. I just stood there, breathing hard, heartbeat in my throat. Then the lights in the elevator flickered and went out. What I saw in that darkness, I won't even try to describe it. Not because I don't remember, but because I think describing it is what lets it in. The only thing I'll say is that when I woke up, I had bitten halfway through my own tongue. I couldn't speak clearly for 2 days. After that night, the dreams stopped again. I never went back to the elevator, but the damage had already been done. I started noticing patterns. Places I had never been started looking familiar. Hallways I walked for the first time gave me déjà vu so strong it made me dizzy. And I wasn't the only one. One night, I stayed late to close the bookstore. I was shelving returns when a man I didn't recognize walked in, wearing a windbreaker and jeans. He looked like a normal guy, but when I asked if I could help him, he looked at me and said, "Do the lights still flicker when it breathes?" I didn't answer. He nodded like he already knew, then left without another word. Things like that kept happening. People I had never seen before, stopping to say things that didn't make sense, or calling me by names I didn't recognize. I tried to move. Found a new place on the edge of the city. Smaller, cheaper, no upstairs neighbors. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, no forwarding address. I even changed my number. I figured if I cut ties to the life I had before, I could escape whatever had been following me. It worked for a while. Then, 2 nights ago, I came home late and found my door already unlocked. I stood in the hall for a long time, keys still in hand, stomach twisting. I live alone. I always lock it behind me. Always. I pushed the door open slowly. The lights were off. The apartment was cold. And there, sitting in the middle of the living room floor, was a small square package wrapped in brown paper. No note. No writing. I didn't touch it. I just stood there, heart thudding in my ears, waiting for something, anything to happen. But nothing did. Eventually I grabbed a towel, scooped the package up, and shoved it in the trash outside. The next morning, it was back. Same paper, same place. This time it was unwrapped. Inside was a single item, an old elevator button panel, scorched around the edges with one button still intact. It said return. I haven't slept since. I can feel it now, whatever it is. It's not in the dreams anymore. It's here, awake with me. It's in the silence between breaths, in the reflection of windows after sunset, in the flicker of lights as I move through hallways that shouldn't be familiar. It's watching, waiting. I don't know what return means. Maybe it wants me to go back. Maybe I already have. The panel is still sitting on my kitchen counter. Every time I try to throw it away, it ends up back where it was. I'm not touching it again. I've tried calling people, but the calls never go through. Texts vanish after I send them. I walked into a police station last night to try and talk to someone, but when I started to explain, I realized I couldn't form the words. It was like my brain just stalled out, like I wasn't allowed to talk about it. I'm writing this now because I think I'm running out of time. Earlier tonight, I turned on my kitchen light and it flickered once. Then again, then stayed off. I heard the humming just outside my door. Not from a dream, from here. From this hallway, my hallway. I think the elevator has found me, and this time, there won't be a door to hold it back. I moved into that apartment in early September, just before the semester started. It was the second floor of a 3-story walk-up, wedged between a dry cleaner and an abandoned convenience store. I'd transferred to a local university after burning out during my second year at a bigger school. Money was tight, and the place was the only thing I could afford without roommates. It was small, old, and smelled like cheap paint and mildew, but it was mine. I remember standing in the doorway on that first day, thinking it felt untouched, like it was ours alone. Just me and the silence. At first, I thought the stress was getting to me. Between work, class, and trying to stay afloat, I barely had time to notice the little things. But they were there. I'd come home from night classes and find the bathroom light on when I was sure I'd turned it off. Once or twice, I thought I heard water running behind the walls. I blamed the pipes. The whole building groaned at night, and I figured it was just old infrastructure. Still, there was a weird sort of raw mist to the air, like someone had been breathing just behind me and stopped when I turned around. One Friday, I got back late after a long shift at the bookstore. I tossed my backpack down and started microwaving leftovers. As I passed the bedroom, I noticed the closet door was cracked open. I always kept it closed. I didn't think much of it at the time. I pushed it shut with my foot and went on with my night. But the next morning it was open again. Not wide, just a few inches, like it had been opened slowly, deliberately, and left that way. I stood there in the doorway, staring into the dark slit of the closet, heart beating a little faster than usual. I checked inside. Clothes, boxes, the old air mattress I used to sleep on. Nothing out of place. I told myself maybe I hadn't latched it fully. That same day, I went to the hardware store and bought one of those door alarms that chime when the door opens. I stuck it on the closet, felt a little ridiculous, and tried to forget about it. That worked for a few days, but then I started noticing other things. My phone charger would be unplugged, coiled neatly on the nightstand when I always left it hanging from the outlet. My toothbrush felt damp some mornings when I hadn't used it yet. I told myself I was misremembering, that stress could play tricks on you, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that there were eyes on me even when I was alone. I didn't tell anyone at first, not because I didn't believe myself, but because I didn't want to sound unstable. People don't like to hear this kind of thing unless there's a clear explanation, and I didn't have one. I wasn't hallucinating, I wasn't dreaming. Something was happening, but it didn't leave any fingerprints. No broken locks, no signs of forced entry, just small, unsettling shifts, like someone was walking through my life with gloves on. After about a month, I snapped. I went to the landlord, asked if anyone else had a key. He shrugged, told me all the locks were changed last spring and nobody else should have access. I asked if he'd ever had complaints about strange activity. He just laughed and said no. But the way his eyes lingered, like he was trying to gauge whether I was serious or unstable, made my stomach churn. I didn't sleep well after that. I started locking my bedroom door from the inside, even though it felt pointless. One night, just before bed, I noticed the door alarm had been disabled. The adhesive strip was loose, hanging by a thread. The closet was shut, locked. But I hadn't touched the alarm since I installed it. I spent that night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for breathing that wasn't mine. Eventually, I talked to my cousin Marcus about it. He'd always been the level-headed one, ex-military, no nonsense. I needed someone who wouldn't dismiss me outright. We met for coffee that Sunday morning. I told him everything. The closet, the charger, the toothbrush, the feeling that my apartment wasn't mine when I wasn't there. He didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly, took a sip of his coffee and said, "If someone's messing with you, you need proof." He offered to lend me his old GoPro, said he used it for hiking trips, but it had solid battery life and decent resolution. I agreed, not really expecting anything. Part of me still hoped I was wrong, that I was just unraveling under stress. But I took the camera anyway, charged it that night, hid it the next morning behind a row of books on my desk, angled to face the bedroom door and closet. That Monday was long. I kept glancing at the clock during lectures, counting down the minutes until I could go home and check the footage. The whole day felt like holding my breath. When I finally got back to the apartment around 5:15, the hallway smelled faintly of bleach. That wasn't unusual. The cleaner sometimes did the main floors on Mondays. Still, it made me pause. I unlocked my door and stepped inside. Everything looked normal. The bed was made. The charger was in the outlet. The closet door was closed, and the alarm strip was dangling the same way I'd left it. I walked over to the desk, pulled the camera from its hiding place, and took a deep breath. Then I sat down, plugged in the cable, and started watching. The footage began just after I left that morning. I watched myself walk out of the room, then fast-forwarded through the first few hours. Nothing moved. Light shifted as the sun passed overhead. Dust floated across the lens. Everything was still. Then, just after noon, the door handle twitched. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It barely moved, but it did move. I rewound the clip, slowed it down. The handle turned slightly to the left, then stopped. A few seconds passed, then it turned again, and the door opened just a few inches. A hand reached through. I paused the video. My own hand was shaking. I backed up the footage, played it again. The hand was pale, small. It reached for the inside knob, then pushed the door open farther. A woman stepped into the frame. She wasn't wearing a mask. She wasn't covered in blood or dirt or anything theatrical. She just looked ordinary. But the way she moved didn't make sense. She walked like someone pretending to walk, like each motion was being performed rather than lived. Her shoulders didn't sway, her knees barely bent. She was wearing a gray sweatshirt, black jeans, and white socks. I sat there, frozen, watching as she moved slowly around the room. She didn't speak. She didn't touch anything at first. She just stared. Her eyes scanned the walls, the bed, the closet. Then she walked over to the nightstand and crouched. She opened the drawer, looked inside, then closed it. She leaned over and sniffed my pillow, pressed her hand flat against the sheets. I fast-forwarded. She spent almost 20 minutes in the room. She didn't open the closet. She didn't leave any obvious trace. But toward the end of the clip, she walked over to the desk. She stood right in front of the camera, inches from the lens. Her face filled the frame. She didn't blink. Her eyes were wide. Her mouth hung open, slightly crooked, like she was mid-thought, but had forgotten the words. Then she leaned forward. Her lips were so close to the lens I could see the cracked skin. She whispered something. I turned the volume up, replayed it 3 times. It sounded like she said, "I live here too." Then she smiled and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her. I sat there for nearly an hour without moving. My skin felt clammy, my throat was dry. I knew I needed to call the police, but part of me didn't want them to know. I wasn't afraid they wouldn't believe me. I was afraid they would, and still couldn't help. Eventually, I called Marcus instead. Told him everything. He didn't say much, just told me to save the footage and meet him at his place across town. He didn't want me staying there another night. I agreed, packed a bag and left within 10 minutes. When I got to his apartment, he had already cleared space in the guest room. He offered me a drink. I declined. We watched the video together on his TV. He sat perfectly still the entire time. When it ended, he turned to me and said, "She had a key." I nodded. That was the only explanation. But what he said next chilled me to my core. She didn't leave. I didn't sleep at all that night. Marcus kept the hallway light on outside the guest room, but it didn't help. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. That flat, almost bored expression, like I was the one intruding. I lay there fully dressed, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to every creak in the walls and wondering how long she'd been doing it. How many times she'd watched me sleep. If she ever touched me while I was out cold and unaware. By 6:15 a.m., I gave up on sleep and got in the shower. The water helped clear my head a little, but the paranoia was already set in. Every shampoo bottle felt misplaced. Every noise from the other side of the wall sounded like footsteps. When I got out, Marcus was already up, drinking coffee and scrolling through his phone. He looked at me over the rim of his mug and said, "You call the cops yet?" I told him no. He asked why not, and I didn't have an answer. I think I just felt like it wouldn't matter. She had a key. She didn't force her way in. She didn't take anything. There was no blood, no violence, just something much worse, something harder to prove. He offered to go back with me later that afternoon, said we'd both go in together, check everything, and figure out the next move. I agreed, mostly because the idea of returning there alone made my stomach twist. We waited until around 1:15 p.m. before driving back to the apartment. The building looked the same as always, quiet, gray, unremarkable. But the moment I stepped out of the car, something felt wrong. I could hear a soft, high-pitched noise in the distance, not loud enough to place, almost like feedback or a far-off whistle. Marcus walked ahead of me, scanning the windows. He had a hand in his jacket pocket, and I knew he was carrying. That gave me a small comfort, but not enough to make my legs stop shaking. We climbed the stairs slowly, step by step. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The air inside was thick, not with smoke or anything visible, but with heat and stillness, like it hadn't been touched or ventilated in hours or days. We stepped inside and Marcus immediately began checking the rooms. He moved quickly, clearing the living room, kitchen, and bathroom in under a minute. Then we got to the bedroom. The closet door was open, not wide, just about a foot, enough to see the edge of the mattress I kept in there, and the plastic storage bin beside it. Marcus looked at me, then pulled the door open the rest of the way. It was empty, but there was a blanket on the floor, folded, a water bottle half full, with condensation still clinging to the outside, and a book. Not mine. Something I'd never seen before. It had no title on the cover, just a black paperback with a strip of duct tape across the front. Something was written on the tape in marker, but it had smeared for moisture. Only one word was still readable: quiet. I stood there staring at it, heart hammering against my ribs. Marcus reached down and picked it up, flipped through the pages. Most of it was blank, but on some of the pages there were small notations, strange symbols, short phrases written in all caps. Some were crossed out violently, others had been underlined repeatedly. He handed it to me without a word, then said, "She was living in here." The words hit harder than I expected. I think I'd already known, but hearing it out loud made it real. I felt the blood drain from my face. She hadn't just visited. She'd moved in. She'd been watching me from inside that very room, probably while I brushed my teeth or changed clothes, maybe while I slept. We bagged the bottle and the notebook, careful not to touch them too much. Marcus wanted to take them to the police himself, said it would hold more weight if they came from someone who wasn't directly involved. I agreed. I stayed behind, standing alone in that room, trying to process everything. That's when I noticed the vents. There was one above the closet door, larger than the others. I'd never paid much attention to it before, but from where I stood, I could see it was slightly off-center, like someone had removed it and hastily put it back. I pulled over a chair, climbed up, and looked closer. There were marks on the frame, tiny scratches along the edge of the metal, and what looked like old fingerprints in the dust. I took out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it inside. It was a crawl space. Not big, maybe just wide enough for a person to slide through on their stomach. I couldn't see where it led, but I could feel the air moving ever so slightly, a slow, steady draft that made my skin crawl. I called Marcus back inside. He climbed up next to me, looked into the vent, then swore under his breath. "This runs above the entire floor," he said. "If she was in there, she could get into any unit." That's when it hit me. The woman hadn't been entering through the front door. She'd been coming down from the ceiling. We called the police. This time, I didn't hesitate. I showed them the footage, gave them the bottle, the notebook, everything we'd found. The officer on scene seemed genuinely disturbed. He radioed for backup, then told us to wait outside while they searched the unit. I sat in Marcus's car with the door open, trying to breathe. My legs wouldn't stop bouncing. Every sound made me jump. When the officers came back out, their expression said it all. They hadn't found her. They'd opened the vent, crawled through with flashlights, checked the ceiling access panels for signs of recent movement, but it was empty. There were drag marks in the dust, fingernail grooves in the insulation. One of them described it as a nest, but no sign of her. They said they'd put in an official report and notified the other tenants. Told me I'd done the right thing. One officer, a younger guy with dark circles under his eyes, told me quietly that I should move out as soon as I could. That this kind of thing didn't usually end clean. I didn't argue. I stayed with Marcus for 2 weeks after that. The university gave me a small emergency grant to cover relocation, and I found a new place near campus, a 4th-floor unit with no attic access and a security system built into the door. I changed all the locks, bought new furniture, tried to start fresh, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Every time I opened a cabinet, I expected to find a note. Every time I looked in the bathroom mirror, I braced for movement behind me. I started leaving the lights on at night, sleeping with the bedroom door locked and a chair wedged beneath the handle. I checked the news every morning, searched for reports of break-ins, stalking cases, missing persons. Nothing. No follow-up. No trace. She'd vanished. Then about 5 weeks later, something new happened. I was coming home from the grocery store. It was around 6:15 p.m., and the sun was just starting to dip behind the buildings. I took the elevator up to the 4th floor, carrying a paper bag full of canned soup and boxed pasta. When I stepped out, the hallway was empty. Quiet. Just the soft buzz of the overhead lights and the distant hum of an apartment television. But there was something taped to my door. A small piece of paper, folded once. No envelope. Just a piece of notebook paper with something written on the front in blocky letters. For him, my hands went numb. I dropped the bag without realizing it. Soup cans rolled across the floor. I looked around, scanned the hallway, then slowly peeled the note from the door and opened it. Inside was a single sentence. "You stopped recording too soon." I didn't go inside. I backed away, heart racing, eyes locked on the doorway. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. Told him to come right away. Then I called the police. By the time the officers arrived, the hallway was still empty. They cleared my unit again. Found nothing. No fingerprints. No evidence of forced entry. The building's security footage showed no one entering my floor for over 3 hours. But the note had been there. They took it for analysis. Promised to review the footage more thoroughly. Told me it might have been a prank, that the woman from before was likely long gone. But their eyes told a different story. They didn't believe it either. That night, I slept with a kitchen knife on the nightstand. I left every light in the apartment on. Around 3:20 a.m., I woke up to a sound in the living room, like something plastic being dragged across tile. I held my breath, sat up slowly, listened. It stopped. I got up, opened the door quietly, and looked around. Nothing. Just the bag of groceries still half spilled by the door. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. That's when I saw it. Across the street, in the window of the building opposite mine, a single light was on. Behind the glass, a figure stood perfectly still. Not moving, just watching. I couldn't make out a face, just the outline. Long hair, shoulders slightly hunched, arms hanging by her sides. I stood there for almost 10 minutes staring back. Then the light in that apartment flicked off, and the hallway light outside mine turned on. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I sat on the couch with the knife resting on my thigh, eyes fixed on the hallway. I didn't hear the door open. I didn't hear any movement inside the unit, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The light outside my door stayed on until dawn. As soon as the sun rose, I packed a bag and left. I told Marcus everything. He offered to let me move back in, but I knew I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep dragging other people into whatever was following me, because that's what it felt like now. Like it wasn't the apartment, it wasn't the building, it was me. Wherever I went, it followed. I filed another report with the police, showed them the note, asked for updates on the previous case. They gave me the same answer: no suspects, no new leads, no signs of the woman from the video. When I asked about the handwriting, they said it didn't match anything in the system. They asked if I had any exes or personal enemies. I didn't. I wasn't close with anyone back then, not enough to attract obsession. I started looking into private security options, got quotes on motion cameras, smart locks, even thermal sensors. But it all felt like overkill, like dressing a bullet wound with a band-aid. She had already been inside my life. She knew how to get in without making a sound. That weekend, I bought a new camera, not just a simple webcam, a proper security setup with cloud backup and motion alerts. I spent all of Saturday wiring it up around the apartment. One above the door, one in the kitchen, one in the hallway, and another facing my bed. I didn't care how paranoid it looked. If she came back, I wanted to know. For the first 3 days, nothing happened. The cameras picked up motion when I moved around. I reviewed the footage every morning. It became a ritual. Wake up, brush teeth, check the feed. Over and over. Every time I left the apartment, I stared at the hallway monitor until the door shut behind me. Then, on the 4th night, I got a notification at 4:12 a.m. Motion detected. Hallway camera. I was already half awake when it buzzed. I didn't even wait to turn on the lights. I grabbed my phone and opened the app. The clip loaded automatically. For the first 3 seconds, there was nothing. Then the screen flickered. Static, just for a moment, and then the feed returned. The hallway was empty, but in the bottom left corner, where the wall met the floor, there was a shadow. A human shadow, not cast from the ceiling light. It came from the left side of the frame, just outside the camera's view. The shadow moved slightly, like someone breathing. Then it disappeared. I jumped out of bed, grabbed the knife, and ran to the hallway. There was no one there. I checked every door, every lock. Nothing had been touched. But the air smelled different, like metal and dust. I reviewed the footage again, slower this time. The glitch wasn't part of the system. It had been forced, like someone had used a jamming device or a signal disruptor. I looked it up. Those things weren't cheap, not something you'd stumble across. You had to know what you were doing. The next morning, I called a tech friend from college, explained the situation, left out the creepier details. Just told him I suspected interference. He told me I could upgrade the system to use hardwired backups and dual feeds. I asked how long it would take. He said a day, maybe 2. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed on the couch with all the lights on, knife in hand, phone on my lap. Nothing happened. The next night, I fell asleep around 3:20 a.m., sitting upright. I woke to the sound of breathing. Not mine. It was soft, almost rhythmic. Coming from the kitchen. I froze. My phone was dead. I must have forgotten to plug it in. I stood slowly, careful not to make a sound, and edged toward the kitchen doorway. The breathing stopped. I turned the corner. The room was empty, but the window above the sink was cracked open, only an inch. But I hadn't opened it. I hadn't even unlocked it. I stepped closer, knife ready, and pulled the curtain aside. There were prints on the glass. Faint, oily outlines of fingers, as if someone had pressed their hands against the window to peer in. I backed away, heart pounding. Locked the window, latched it, checked the entire apartment again. Nothing else was disturbed. When I turned to go back to bed, I noticed something on the floor near the door. It was another piece of paper, folded neatly. No writing on the outside this time. I picked it up with the blade of the knife and unfolded it slowly. Inside were just 3 words. Check your closet. I almost dropped the note. The adrenaline hit me so hard I felt nauseous. I stepped backward, into the hallway, then toward the bedroom. I kept the knife up, shaking, my vision tunneling. I didn't hear anything, didn't see any movement, but I could feel it. That presence, like static in the air. Like I was already being watched. I reached the closet. The door was closed. I pressed my ear against it. Nothing. No breathing. No movement. Just silence. Then I opened it. It was empty. The clothes were untouched. The floor was clear. No new blankets. No bottles. No hidden notebooks. But there was something tucked under the bottom shelf. A small plastic case. The kind used for camera memory cards. I crouched, keeping the knife steady, and picked it up. Inside was a mini SD card. No label, just black plastic and metal teeth. I didn't want to view it at home. I drove to a 24-hour diner 15 minutes away, ordered a coffee I didn't drink, pulled out my laptop, and plugged in the card. It held 1 video, no audio, just a single continuous shot of my bedroom, viewed from a low angle, probably hidden under the bed. The timestamp showed it had been recording 3 nights ago. The video started in darkness, then the lights came on. I walked into frame, tossed my bag on the floor, changed into sweatpants. I watched myself crawl into bed. Turn off the lamp. Darkness again. Then 5 minutes later, the closet door opened. She stepped out, same woman, same stiff posture, same distant eyes. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She walked to the side of the bed and stood there, staring. She stood like that for 11 minutes. Then she leaned forward, so close to the camera that her hair brushed the lens. She smiled. Then she climbed back into the closet and closed the door. The clip ended there. I sat in that diner until sunrise. I didn't move. I didn't eat. I didn't cry. I just watched the door, waiting for it to open. When I got back to the apartment, everything was gone. The cameras, the lights, even the notes. She'd taken it all. The place was spotless, like no one had ever lived there. I went straight to the police, showed them the card, they copied the footage, asked for the card back, told me it was now evidence, promised to keep me updated. That was 9 months ago. No one ever followed up. The case is still open, no matches, no sightings, nothing. I dropped out of school, moved across the country, changed my name, got a job under the table. I don't tell people where I'm from. I don't make friends. I don't sleep in the same place twice. I leave the closet doors open now, always, every room, every time. Because the truth is, she never needed to be invited. She never knocked. She never forced her way in. She was always waiting. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm just about to fall asleep, I hear it again, the sound of breathing from inside the walls. When I was 17, I took a job cleaning foreclosed homes for a local contractor. It was summer break, and I figured it'd be easy money, sweeping out broken glass, tossing furniture, that kind of thing. Most of the places were either trashed or empty, but a few still had furniture, like the owners had left in a hurry. It was eerie at times, but nothing I couldn't handle. One afternoon, I was sent to an old duplex on the edge of town, tucked behind a stretch of overgrown trees off a dead-end road. The address was handwritten on a crumpled work order, with a note saying, "Interior cleanup only, no utilities." I remember thinking it looked more like a place you'd see in a horror movie than somewhere someone actually lived. The porch was sunken in, vines were growing over the roof, and one of the front windows was boarded up from the inside. I had a key, but the front door didn't want to budge. I had to shoulder it open, and when I stepped inside, I was hit with a smell that I still can't describe. It was stale, sure, but there was something else beneath it, like mildew mixed with something sour. I covered my nose with my shirt and stepped into the living room. There was a couch missing its cushions, a broken TV stand, and shattered picture frames scattered across the floor. The whole place felt wrong. I don't mean haunted or cursed or anything like that. Just off, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I started in the kitchen, bagging up broken dishes and scraping food remnants out of the sink. Most of the cabinets were empty, except for one with old medicine bottles and a can of powdered infant formula. That struck me as strange, but I didn't think too much of it at the time. What got to me was the second bedroom. The layout of the duplex was simple. Living room, kitchen, bathroom, and 2 bedrooms at the end of a short hallway. The first room had nothing in it but a rusty bed frame and a pile of insulation in one corner. The second room was different. The door was already open, but only just. When I pushed it all the way, I felt resistance. Something was leaning against the back of it. I stepped inside and saw a mattress on the floor. No bed frame, just the mattress. It was stained in places I didn't want to examine too closely. The window had a blanket nailed over it, and the only light came from a narrow gap near the ceiling where the blanket had torn. The walls were covered in what looked like writing, not graffiti, not paint. It was pencil, thousands of tiny words stacked over each other, like someone had been scribbling obsessively for weeks. I walked over to read some of it. Most of it didn't make sense. Rambling phrases, repeated names, the same sentence over and over. One part said, "No light, no time, no eyes," again and again in a shaky hand. Another said, "Don't listen, don't listen, don't listen." I felt a chill crawl up my neck. That's when I heard it. A noise behind me. Not loud, just a tiny sound like a shifting weight. A floorboard giving under pressure. I spun around, heart in my throat, but there was no one there. Just the hallway behind me. I tried to shake it off. Houses make sounds. It's part of the job. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just walked into something that didn't want me there. I backed out of the room and closed the door. I spent the next 30 minutes cleaning up the rest of the place, trying not to think about what I'd seen. I kept glancing at the hallway, expecting to see that door open again, but it stayed shut. Eventually, I finished bagging everything and headed for the front door. That's when I realized I was missing my phone. I'd had it in my back pocket when I came in, but now it was gone. I checked the kitchen, the bathroom, even under the couch. Nothing. I told myself I must have left it in that second bedroom, even though I knew I hadn't taken it out while I was in there. Reluctantly, I walked back down the hall. The air felt heavier, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in that one part of the house. I opened the bedroom door and immediately felt that resistance again, like something was pushing back. But I stepped in anyway. The mattress was just as I'd left it. The writing was still all over the walls, but now the blanket over the window had been pulled loose. Light spilled into the room, and that's when I saw it. More writing. Not on the walls this time, but on the floor. It looked fresh, not dusty or faded like the rest. Someone had scraped it into the wood with something sharp. It said, "I saw you." That was it. Just those 3 words. I froze. Every instinct I had told me to leave. I turned, ready to bolt, when something caught my eye just outside the doorframe. Another word, written low to the ground. It said, "Look." And I did. I stepped back and looked into the narrow closet across the hallway. The door was open just a crack. Inside was total darkness, but something was reflecting light from the floor. I leaned closer. It was my phone, just sitting there on the wood floor. I hesitated. Every fiber in my body told me not to reach in, not to get close, but I told myself it was just nerves. I stepped into the closet and bent down to grab it. As soon as my hand closed around it, the door slammed shut behind me. Pitch black. No light, no air. Just the weight of that tiny space closing in around me. I panicked, shoved at the door, but it wouldn't budge. I kicked, screamed, slammed my shoulder into it, but it held firm. My breathing got faster. My lungs burned. I started crying, yelling for help, even though I knew no one would hear me. Then something whispered, right next to my ear. I couldn't understand the words, not exactly, but it was a voice, a human voice, breathy, wet, like someone with a mouthful of water was trying to speak. Then silence. The door opened. Just like that, I stumbled out, gasping, drenched in sweat. I didn't even check the room. I ran, out the hall, through the living room, out the front door. I didn't stop until I reached the street. I sat in my car for what felt like an hour, shaking, trying to catch my breath. My phone was still in my hand. The screen was cracked and it wouldn't turn on. Eventually, I drove back to the contractor's office and quit on the spot. A few days later, I got a call from the owner. He said he'd gone to the duplex to double-check my cleanup and found the place completely trashed. Furniture overturned, writing on the walls that hadn't been there before. He sounded angry, like he thought I'd lost it. I asked him if he'd seen the closet door. He didn't answer, just said the house had been condemned and that it was being boarded up that week. I tried to move on. I went back to school that fall, started sleeping with the lights on. But the worst part came a month later. I was walking through campus when a guy from one of my classes flagged me down. He was laughing about a video he'd seen, said someone had found an old phone in a condemned house and uploaded the footage. He showed it to me. It was grainy and dark, filmed in night vision. The view was shaking, pointing at walls covered in scribbled words. The person holding the camera was breathing heavily, moving through the house like they were being chased. I recognized the writing. I recognized the mattress. Then the camera turned toward a mirror, and I saw the person filming. It was me. I hadn't filmed anything. I never hit record. But there I was staring into the lens. And behind me, in the reflection, someone else was smiling. I didn't sleep for 3 days after watching that video. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that reflection. Not mine, but the thing standing behind me. Its mouth was stretched too wide, and its eyes didn't blink. It looked human, but there was something wrong with the way it stood. Like it didn't understand how a body should move. I deleted the video, then wiped my browser history, but it didn't matter. I couldn't unsee it. I kept thinking about how that phone had ended up in the closet. I hadn't dropped it, I hadn't touched it, and yet there it was, in a room I hadn't entered, placed carefully in the middle of the floor like bait. And the video, how had it been filmed without me noticing? How had someone recorded from my perspective in a house with no electricity? It made no sense. I tried to tell myself it was a prank. Maybe someone on the cleanup crew had planted the phone. Maybe they filmed themselves and doctored the reflection. That would have been easier to believe if not for what happened next. 2 weeks after I quit, I got a call from a blocked number. I don't usually answer those, but this time I did. The voice on the other end was whispering. Not talking, just breathing heavily, then whispering a single word. Found. Then the line went dead. I stared at the screen, my heart thudding in my chest. I didn't know what to do. I called the number back, but it didn't ring. It just gave a message saying the number wasn't in service. That night, I started locking my bedroom door. I lived in a house with 4 roommates, and none of them knew about what had happened. I didn't want to scare them. I didn't even know how to explain it. So I kept it to myself and told them I was just dealing with anxiety. That same night, just past 3 o'clock, I woke up gasping. Not from a nightmare, from a sound. It was faint, barely audible over the hum of the fan I kept by the window. But it was there. A slow, dragging noise, like something heavy was being pulled across the floor just outside my door. I sat up, straining to listen. Then it stopped. Silence filled the room. I got out of bed and walked to the door, pressing my ear against it. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices. Just dead air. I stood there for almost a full minute before turning the lock and slowly pulling the door open. The hallway was empty, but there was something on the floor. A piece of paper, torn from a spiral notebook, folded in half. I bent down and picked it up. My hands were shaking. Inside, written in blocky pencil letters, was a message. You were supposed to turn around. I dropped the paper like it burned me. I wanted to believe one of my roommates was messing with me, but deep down, I knew better. This wasn't a prank. This was deliberate, and whoever, or whatever, was doing it knew exactly where I lived, where I slept, and what I hadn't done in that house. I hadn't turned around. The next morning, I asked all my roommates if they'd been up late, if they'd seen anyone outside the house. Everyone said no. One of them joked that I should lay off the horror movies, and I forced a laugh, pretending it was nothing. But I started keeping a knife under my pillow after that. The days passed, and nothing happened. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, that the stress had made me hallucinate. But then I started seeing the same writing again. Not at home, at school. It started in the library. I was studying for a midterm when I reached for a book from the top shelf. As I pulled it down, another book fell. I bent to pick it up, and that's when I saw it. Written on the underside of the shelf, in the same blocky handwriting, "Stop looking." I froze. My hands started to tremble. I left the library without checking out the book. Over the next few weeks, the messages started showing up in other places. Inside the bathroom stall at the campus rec center, scratched into the paint on a locker room wall, scrawled in chalk behind a vending machine in the student lounge. Each one was meant for me. The handwriting was the same. The phrasing was the same. Short, direct, and always addressed to me without using my name. You let it out. Do not sleep with the light off. It wants to be seen. I stopped going to class. I started staying home. drawing the curtains, covering every mirror in my room. I couldn't risk seeing it again. That thing in the reflection. I bought blackout curtains, taped them shut, and stuffed towels in the cracks under the door. I thought maybe I could wait it out, that if I didn't acknowledge it, it would go away. But that wasn't how it worked. One night, I woke up to a pressure on my chest. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Sleep paralysis, I thought. That's all it is. But then I heard it again. The voice, right next to my ear. It didn't say a word this time. It laughed. It was a quiet, rattling laugh, as if something broken was trying to mimic the sound of amusement. Then the weight lifted, and I could breathe again. I gasped, rolled out of bed, and turned on every light in the house. That was the last time I stayed there. I packed a bag and left in the middle of the night. I didn't even tell my roommates. I went to stay with my sister 2 towns over, hoping that distance would help. But the writing followed me. On the second night, I found another note, taped to the inside of the bathroom mirror. You can't unsee it. I tore it down and threw it away. On the 4th night, I found the word behind, etched into the frost on my bedroom window. I called the contractor who had sent me to the house. I needed answers. I told him I'd had nightmares, that something felt wrong about the place. I asked if anyone had died there. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "You weren't supposed to go into the 2nd bedroom." I didn't say anything. He continued, "The last guy we sent there quit too. Said the walls were whispering. Said the house knew his name. We thought he was on something." I asked why he'd sent me in alone. He didn't answer that part, just said the house was set to be demolished by the end of the year. I hung up. That night, I dreamed I was back inside the room. The walls weren't covered in writing anymore. They were covered in skin, human skin. And the voice wasn't whispering anymore. It was screaming. When I woke up, I had a word written on my arm. Not a tattoo, not a marker, carved, shallow but real. It said, "Listen." That was when I realized it wasn't just trying to be seen. It wanted to be heard. And I had heard it once, in the closet. I thought maybe if I went back, I could make it stop. I could undo whatever I had triggered. So I drove back to the duplex. It was still there, but boarded up. The windows were sealed with plywood, and the front door was padlocked. I parked around the corner and waited until after dark. Then I broke in through the back. The inside was worse than I remembered. The smell was stronger. The air felt wet, like something was rotting behind the walls. But I went straight to the hallway, to the 2nd bedroom. The door wasn't just closed this time, it was barricaded. Boards nailed across the frame. I pried them loose one by one, heart racing with every creak of the wood. When I finally opened the door, I found the room untouched. No mattress, no blanket, no writing, just bare walls and a concrete floor. But I felt it, the silence, the pressure, like the room itself was holding its breath. I stepped inside, and the door closed behind me. Not slammed, not violently, just slowly, deliberately. I turned to open it, but there was no handle, just smooth wood. Then I heard it again, a whisper. Closer this time, it said, "You're here." And then the floor cracked open beneath my feet. I didn't fall through the floor. It only felt like I did. For a split second, I lost all sense of balance, like gravity itself had dropped out from under me. I staggered back and hit the wall, breathing hard, but when I looked down, the floor was solid. No cracks, no holes, just rough concrete, stained and uneven. I wanted to believe it was just in my head, that the fear had finally pushed me over the edge. But something had changed. The air felt heavier than before, warmer, like the walls had closed in, sealing the room tight. Then I noticed the sound, a low rhythmic thudding, not loud but constant. It was coming from inside the walls. I pressed my ear to the nearest surface and listened. There was something alive behind the drywall. Not rats, not pipes, something wet, moving. I backed away and scanned the room for anything I'd missed. There, in the far corner, I saw it. A crack in the floor. Not wide, but deep, like someone had taken a chisel to the concrete and carved a narrow trench. I walked over and knelt beside it. The thudding got louder. I leaned in and saw an eye. Not a reflection, not a trick of the light, a human eye, embedded deep within the crack, staring up at me from inside the floor. It blinked. I fell backwards, scrambling across the room, my breath caught in my throat. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My body had locked up. Then the wall behind me shifted. Not visibly, not all at once, just enough for me to feel it, like it had taken a breath. The writing returned. Right in front of me, words began to appear on the bare surface, not written with ink or pencil, but forming beneath the paint like veins rising under skin. I never left. I ran to the door, pounded on it, clawed at the wood, but it wouldn't open. I screamed for help until my throat burned. I didn't care who heard me. I just wanted out. Then, behind me, another sound. A voice, but not from the walls this time. From my phone. It had turned on. The screen was black, but the speaker was playing something. Static at first, then words. My voice, from the video I never recorded. "I'm standing in the room now," the voice said. "It's empty, but I feel it. Watching, waiting." I stared at the phone in my hand, unable to move. "I think it's still here," the recording continued. "I think it never left, and I think I made it worse." Silence. Then a final phrase, barely audible. "It's learning how to stay." The screen went dark. The door opened behind me. No sound, no fanfare, just an invitation. I didn't hesitate. I bolted out of the room, down the hall, through the kitchen, and out the back door. I didn't stop until I reached the tree line behind the property. My lungs burned, my legs felt like rubber, and my vision pulsed with every heartbeat. I didn't look back. Not once. I drove straight to a motel and checked in without unpacking a thing. I left the lights on, locked the door, and curled up on the bed with a chair jammed under the knob. That night, I didn't sleep. But I did dream. I dreamed I was standing outside the duplex again, only it wasn't abandoned. The windows were glowing with soft yellow light, and music played from inside, something old, like a lullaby played on a warped record. I walked to the front door and knocked. A voice answered, not mine, not anyone I knew. It said, "You came back. Good." I woke up gasping. There was a new message on my phone. No caller ID, no timestamp, just one word. Soon. I threw the phone across the room. It shattered. The screen split in two and the plastic backing popped off, but that didn't stop it from ringing. I didn't answer it. I left the motel before dawn and drove out of state. No destination, just away. I didn't stop until the sun was high and the gas tank was almost empty. I pulled into a diner, ordered coffee I didn't drink, and tried to plan my next move. The waitress dropped a receipt on the table. There was writing on the back. You cannot outrun it. I left the diner without paying. Everywhere I went, the writing followed. Gas stations, rest stops, motel mirrors, bathroom stalls, scratched into the paint, burned into napkins, carved into wood. Always the same hand, always the same tone. You were supposed to see, you were supposed to hear, you were supposed to turn around. Eventually, I stopped trying to hide. I started recording everything. Not for proof, not to show anyone, just so I'd remember it was real. I talked into the camera at night, explaining what I'd seen, what I'd heard, hoping it would somehow give me power over it. It didn't. All it did was make the voice louder. The last recording I made started on its own. I woke up to my phone buzzing. When I played the video, I saw myself asleep. The camera was filming from the corner of the room, but I had no idea how it got there. I watched as my body stirred in bed. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to see movement in the background. The closet door creaked open, and something crawled out. Not walked, crawled, low to the ground like it had no bones. It slithered across the floor, stopped beside the bed, and slowly pulled itself up until it was inches from my face. Then it looked at the camera and smiled. The video ended there. I threw the phone into a lake the next day, but the voice didn't stop. Neither did the writing. That's when I realized the truth. It didn't matter where I went, what I destroyed, what I tried to erase. The moment I saw it, that first moment in the mirror, it became part of me. I had let it in, Now it was staying, not in the house, not in the phone, in me. I started losing time, waking up in places I didn't remember going. One morning I found myself sitting in the front yard of the duplex, even though I hadn't been back in weeks. The house was gone. Burned to the foundation, charred wood, ash, nothing left but a blackened concrete slab and a dead tree leaning over the wreckage. But carved into the sidewalk, beneath a layer of soot, were the words, "I still see you. And under that, I like your eyes." I moved again, changed my name, got rid of every photo of me I could find. But it didn't help. The people around me started acting strange. Coworkers avoided me. Strangers stared too long. One man on the bus leaned over and whispered, "You're the one from the video," before getting off without another word. I didn't respond. What could I say? Eventually, I stopped leaving the house. I covered the windows, got rid of the mirrors, unplugged everything with a screen. I kept the lights on all night and only slept in short bursts. Still, I saw it, in the shadows, in the corners of the room, just out of view. Waiting, and then came the knock. Not loud, just enough to be heard. I opened the door. No one was there, but a package sat on the ground, wrapped in paper, no return address. I brought it inside and opened it. Inside was my phone, the one I threw into the lake. Dry, working, already on. A new video was queued. I pressed play. It was me, talking, sitting on the motel bed. "I saw it," I was saying. "I know what it wants, and I know what happens next." Then the screen went black. White letters appeared. "Now you know too." That's why I'm telling you this. Not for sympathy, not for help, because you've seen it now, and it sees you. You can try to run, you can try to forget, but eventually it will speak to you. Maybe in a dream, maybe in the walls, maybe in your own voice. And when it does, remember what I didn't. Don't look, don't listen, and whatever you do, don't turn around.